You've been told that to fix your life you need to speak louder, prove yourself, explain your worth to everyone. But if that were true, why do you feel drained every time you argue? Why do you feel unseen even when you shout? Why does your peace vanish the moment you try to please others? The truth is, silence is not weakness. Silence is power. When you stay silent, when you pull back and turn inward, something magical begins to happen. The noise of the world fades. The weight of other people's opinions slips off your shoulders. And for the first time, you start to hear yourself, the calm voice inside that already knows the way. Buddhism has whispered this truth for centuries. You don't need to chase control. You don't need to fight every battle. You don't need to convince the world of your value. You only need to focus on yourself. Because when you do, life rearranges itself. Problems untangle. People show their true colors. And everything that once felt stuck begins to fall into place. Tonight, as you hear these words, something inside you will shift. The restless energy will soften. The endless thoughts will slow down. And you will feel a strength that doesn't come from noise, but from silence. A strength that is unshakable. Tomorrow, you will wake with clearer eyes, lighter shoulders, and a heart that finally feels steady. This is not just an idea. This is a transformation waiting for you. Are you ready? When you stay silent and focus on yourself, a shift begins that words can never capture. What feels like emptiness at first slowly reveals itself as the deepest presence you have ever known. In that quiet, the weight of the world loosens its grip, and something inside begins to settle. The truth is that restlessness has never been your enemy. It has only been a signal, a force waiting to be transformed. And the very tool you have been avoiding, silence, is the doorway to turning that restless energy into clarity, wisdom, and strength. Restlessness is one of the most common human experiences. It lives in the tapping foot under the table, the endless scrolling on your phone, the urge to check, compare, or seek constant stimulation. It feels as though you are running towards something but never reaching it. Buddhism describes this as a form of suffering, a mind unable to rest in itself. Yet within this agitation lies the potential for transformation. Just as heat turns raw ore into pure metal, silence has the power to refine restlessness into wisdom. The process begins by seeing restlessness for what it truly is, unsettled energy. Too often we mistake it for a flaw, a sign that something is wrong with us, or that we need to fix life before peace can arrive. But restlessness is not proof that you are broken, it is proof that your mind is overextended. The more you chase relief through external stimulation, the more restless you become. The very act of running away keeps you trapped in the cycle. This is where silence enters as a form of alchemy. Silence does not force restlessness away. It does not demand perfection or control. Instead, it allows the restless energy to slow down naturally, the way muddy water clears once it is left untouched. The Buddhist texts often use this metaphor. When water is stirred, dirt rises and clouds it. When you stop disturbing it, the particles fall, and the water becomes transparent again. Your mind works the same way. In stillness, confusion settles, and wisdom surfaces without effort. It is important to understand that silence is not just the absence of sound in the outside world. True silence is inner quiet, the ability to stop reacting to every thought, opinion, or urge. Outer silence may help create the conditions, but it is inner silence that performs the transformation. You can sit in a forest with no sound and still feel restless. And you can sit in a noisy cafe, yet carry a deep quiet inside if you stop grasping at every distraction. When you allow silence to deepen, restlessness begins to reveal its layers. At first, it may appear as physical agitation, a racing heart, shallow breath, or a need to move. Beneath that, you may notice a restless mind, jumping from thought to thought, unable to focus. If you stay present without judgment, another layer appears. Restlessness is often covering emotions that have not been faced. Anxiety, regret, fear, longing, all hidden beneath constant movement. In silence, you give them space to surface. You no longer cover them with noise. Instead, you witness them, and by being witnessed, they begin to dissolve. This is not an easy process. The first stages of silence often feel unbearable because you encounter everything you have avoided. The noise of life is a shield against discomfort. When the shield falls, the raw restlessness rises. But here lies the alchemy. By staying with it instead of running, you discover that it changes. What felt like unbearable tension becomes manageable. What felt permanent reveals itself as temporary. The restless storm passes, leaving a clear sky in its place. Neuroscience supports what Buddhism has always taught. When you sit in silence and allow the mind to rest, the brain's default mode network, the circuit responsible for wandering thoughts, begins to quiet down. This creates space for deeper connections and insights to form. Creativity flourishes, problem-solving improves, and emotions settle. Silence literally reshapes the brain, turning restlessness into clarity. The transformation is not only mental, but also emotional. When silence becomes a habit, you begin to notice patterns that once controlled you. You see how much of your restlessness comes from craving approval, craving distraction, craving certainty. By not feeding these cravings with constant reaction, their grip weakens. You realize that you do not need every urge to be satisfied. This realization is freedom. It is the gold hidden beneath the mud. Buddhism speaks of equanimity, the balanced state where neither pleasure nor pain can disturb the mind. Silence trains equanimity. By sitting with restlessness without reacting, you learn to face life without being pulled in every direction. Instead of being a slave to impulses, you become an observer of them. This observer's mind does not suppress emotion, it simply refuses to be ruled by it. Over time, your inner gold shines more clearly, the wisdom of seeing life as it is, not as your restlessness demands it to be. This alchemy also changes how you relate to others. Restlessness often pushes people into arguments, over-explaining, or trying to control situations. Silence, on the other hand, shifts the dynamic. When you no longer rush to defend yourself, the tension dissipates. When you no longer need to prove, power shifts. People sense calmness in you, and it disarms their aggression. This is not passivity, it is mastery. You discover that silence speaks louder than words ever could. On a deeper level, silence transforms your relationship with time. Restlessness is often tied to the future or the past, worrying about what might happen, replaying what already did. Silence roots you in the present. It shows you that peace exists only now, in this moment. The more you practice, the more natural it becomes to rest in the present instead of running from it. This presence itself is inner gold because it frees you from the endless chase. But silence must be practiced, not only admired. It begins with small steps, pausing before you react, breathing before you speak, taking a moment each day to sit without distraction. These moments accumulate. Each pause is like a drop of clear water poured into the muddy bowl. Over time, the whole bowl clears. Silence becomes less of an effort and more of your natural state. The fruits of this transformation reveal themselves gradually. You may notice you are less reactive in conflicts. You may find that anxiety softens without needing constant solutions. You may see opportunities arise that were hidden when your mind was clouded. This is not coincidence. This is the natural alignment that silence creates. When restlessness no longer clouds your perception, you see the world more clearly, and clarity guides you toward wiser choices. The path of silence does not remove challenges. Life will still bring noise, conflict, and uncertainty. But silence equips you with a different way of meeting them. Instead of being consumed by restlessness, you hold steady. Instead of being pulled into chaos, you anchor yourself in calm. This is the transformation of inner gold, not an escape from life, but the strength to walk through it, untouchable by its storms. Over time, the alchemy of silence becomes your greatest teacher. You stop searching for answers outside because you discover that clarity was always inside, hidden beneath the restless mud. You stop fearing stillness because you realize it contains the very wisdom you were seeking in noise. And you stop chasing peace because you understand that silence is peace, available in every breath, waiting for you to notice it. The restless mind once told you that silence was empty, unbearable, even dangerous. Now you see that silence is fullness, a reservoir of strength, clarity, and wisdom. This is the alchemy. What once felt like chaos has become your source of calm. What once seemed like weakness has revealed itself as power. And in this power, everything begins to fall into place. The alchemy of silence shows that peace is not something to be chased outside, but uncovered within. Once you see that restlessness softens when left alone, a deeper truth begins to surface. Silence is not only a medicine for the noisy mind, it is also the sharpest tool for cutting through the ego. Because beneath agitation sits another force that keeps people chained to suffering, the constant need to defend, to justify, to prove. And the moment you learn to remain silent instead of feeding this urge, you touch freedom that the ego can never reach. The ego thrives on reaction. Every time you defend yourself in anger, every time you explain yourself to seek approval, every time you justify choices just to protect an image, you are building walls around yourself. The mind constructs these walls from words, stories, and identities. And the more you engage in reaction, the thicker the walls become. Silence works differently. Silence does not fight the ego head-on. It simply stops supplying it with bricks. Without constant fuel, the structure weakens, cracks appear, and in time it dissolves. This is why the greatest masters often taught not through arguments, but through stillness. The Buddha was questioned, criticized, even provoked, yet often he remained silent. That silence was not avoidance, it was power. By refusing to react, he refused to step into the trap of egoic entanglement. He showed that strength is not found in shouting the loudest, but in the refusal to be moved by provocation. Non-reaction dissolves the battlefield itself. Ego lives on comparison. It wants to be right, superior, admired. Every time you react defensively, you are unconsciously agreeing to play the game of comparison. Silence breaks this cycle. When you do not react, there is no game. Without reaction, the other person is left only with their own words, their own projections. You no longer carry them. And when you stop carrying them, you stop building karma out of them. Karmic entanglement begins when one reaction meets another, creating a chain of cause and effect that stretches far beyond the present moment. A single harsh word invites another. An argument plants seeds of resentment that sprout days, months, even years later. Non-reaction cuts the chain. Silence acts like a blade that stops karma from multiplying. What could have been a storm ends as a passing cloud. It takes discipline to choose silence over defense. The ego panics when left undefended. It fears being misunderstood, being unseen, being disrespected. Yet this fear is the very prison that keeps it alive. When you resist the urge to explain, you discover that misunderstanding is not fatal. When you let others misjudge you, you realize their judgment does not shape your worth. In the space where you would normally defend yourself, a new kind of freedom appears, the freedom to exist without needing anyone to validate you. Psychology echoes this truth. Defensive behavior strengthens identity attachment. The more you defend, the more rigid your sense of self becomes. But rigid identities are fragile. They crack under pressure because life constantly challenges them. Non-reaction keeps you fluid, adaptable. You no longer cling to a single version of yourself that must always be defended. You become light, free to grow, free to change. This practice also transforms relationships. Most conflicts are not about the issue at hand, but about the ego's refusal to let go. Arguments continue because each person feels they must win, must be right, must have the last word. When one person chooses silence, the cycle breaks. What was a battle turns into an echo chamber. The noise has nothing to feed on. This is not weakness, it is mastery over the subtle need to dominate. It is an act of compassion too, because it spares both sides the suffering of unnecessary conflict. Non-reaction is not suppression. Suppression is when you swallow anger but continue to burn inside. True silence is when anger does not find a hook to hang on. You notice the rise of emotion, you feel its pull, but you allow it to pass without expression or judgment. Over time, the waves of reaction lose their strength. This is how ego dissolves, not by force, but by the gentle discipline of letting go again and again. One of the strongest signs of ego is the obsession with being understood. We feel the need to explain our choices, to prove our worth, to justify our silence itself. Yet the more we chase understanding, the more tangled we become. Non-reaction shows you that being misunderstood is not a threat. When you no longer fear being misunderstood, you no longer live as a hostage to others' opinions. That is liberation. Spiritual texts often describe the ego as a thief. It steals your peace by demanding reaction. It convinces you that silence means weakness, that without defense you will be diminished. But when you practice non-reaction, you realize the opposite is true. Silence returns your power. Reaction scatters energy outward, while silence gathers it inward. With every unspoken defense, you grow stronger. With every unjustified choice, you become freer. Life constantly presents opportunities to practice this. A sharp comment from a colleague, a criticism from a loved one, a stranger's rudeness. In those moments, the ego demands immediate response. Yet if you pause, breathe, and let silence carry you, you will see the pattern. The anger that rises is not about truth but about ego needing fuel. And when you stop giving it fuel, the fire dies. Silence also protects your energy. Defending yourself consumes enormous amounts of mental and emotional strength. Justifying yourself to others drains your spirit. In non-reaction, you conserve that energy, redirecting it toward growth and awareness. Instead of wasting hours rehearsing arguments in your mind, you channel that power into presence, creativity, and compassion. The energy once trapped in ego now nourishes your true self. In Buddhist practice, this is closely tied to the principle of right speech. Silence is not just the absence of harmful words, it is the foundation of wise words. Only when you stop reacting blindly can your speech emerge from clarity rather than ego. By holding silence first, you ensure that when you do speak, your words are free from the chains of defense and filled instead with wisdom. Another hidden gift of non-reaction is that it reveals the illusions of control. The ego reacts because it believes it can shape how others see you, how situations unfold, how outcomes align. But reality is larger than that. Others' perceptions are beyond your control. Outcomes are beyond your grasp. Non-reaction teaches surrender to what island, and in that surrender, the false power of ego falls away, replaced by the quiet strength of acceptance. Choosing silence over justification also rewires how you see yourself. The ego is built from stories about who you are, what you must protect, how you must appear. Each time you defend those stories, you reinforce them. But when you allow criticism or misunderstanding to pass without reaction, you weaken those stories. You realize that you are not the story at all. You are the awareness beneath the story, untouched by praise or blame. This realization dissolves karmic patterns as well. Many conflicts are not new, but repetitions of old wounds. The ego reacts because it carries unresolved impressions from the past. Non-reaction breaks these loops. By not engaging, you refuse to plant new seeds of resentment. Slowly the old seeds die without nourishment, and karma loosens its grip. The present moment becomes lighter, no longer burdened by echoes of the past. There is a quiet dignity in choosing silence, dignity not built on pride but on inner steadiness. You discover that your worth does not increase when people agree with you and does not decrease when they criticize you. Worth is not something that needs defense. It exists in the simple fact of your being. Non-reaction protects this dignity because it refuses to hand control of your peace to anyone else. The practice deepens when applied not only in conflict but also in daily life. When tempted to justify why you said no to an invitation, hold silence. When urged to explain your choices just to avoid judgment, hold silence. Every time you resist the pull to defend, you cut a thread of ego. Over time, these threads unravel completely, leaving you free. As the ego dissolves through non-reaction, something greater takes its place: authenticity. When you no longer perform for approval or defend against criticism, you begin to act from your true nature. Your choices align with what feels deeply right rather than what will be accepted. Your presence grows lighter because you are not dragging the armor of constant defense. This is not only liberating for you but healing for those around you, because they no longer meet a mask but a soul. The journey of ego dissolution is not about erasing individuality, but about removing the false weight of identification. You remain unique, but no longer enslaved to the need to protect an image. Silence helps you live in truth without noise. Non-reaction frees you to be, without clinging to what others think that being should look like. And in this freedom, you discover the deepest gift, peace that cannot be shaken, and a self that is not a mask, but pure awareness. In the end, silence does not make you less. It strips away the layers that never belonged to you. It reveals what remains when defense and justification fall away. It prevents the endless karmic loops that keep suffering alive, and in its stillness you uncover a strength that words cannot touch. Non-reaction is not weakness. It is the dissolution of ego. It is the end of chains. It is the beginning of freedom. When silence begins to dissolve the ego, something deeper calls you forward. It is no longer only about holding your peace in moments of conflict or choosing non-reaction when provoked. The path now invites you to live silence as a discipline, not an occasional practice. This is what the Buddha referred to as noble silence, a silence that is not merely absence of speech, but the presence of awareness, restraint, and clarity. To walk with noble silence in daily life is to bring the wisdom of stillness into every environment, whether at work, with family, or in ordinary routines, so that silence is not a retreat you visit, but a way of living you embody. Noble silence is not muteness. It is not cutting yourself off from the world or refusing to speak at all. Instead, it is the deliberate choice to withhold words that do not serve clarity, compassion, or truth. In retreats, practitioners are guided to remain silent for days so that the mind may settle. Yet the true challenge is carrying this silence into daily interactions, where temptations to speak unnecessarily surround us. Every workplace discussion, every family gathering, every casual exchange offers a test. Do you speak from clarity, or do you fill the air with words that clutter? The discipline begins with awareness of speech. In most conversations, people talk not to communicate, but to release tension, to avoid discomfort, or to seek validation. Words become noise. Noble silence asks you to watch this impulse. Before speaking, you pause and ask, is this necessary? Is it kind? Is it true? Is it timely? When the answer is no, you allow silence to remain. This restraint conserves energy and sharpens the value of your words. In the workplace, this practice transforms communication. Meetings often overflow with people speaking to prove they are involved, defending their image with constant commentary. Noble silence allows you to step back. When you speak, only when your words add clarity, your voice carries more weight. Others notice that when you choose to speak, it matters. The discipline of silence also makes you a better listener. Instead of preparing your response while others talk, you hear with full attention. This deep listening not only prevents misunderstandings, but also builds respect. Families present another challenge. In close relationships, the temptation to correct, defend, or comment is constant. Silence here does not mean withdrawing affection. It means choosing not to feed unnecessary conflict. When an argument rises, noble silence gives space for emotion to settle instead of escalating with reactive words. Parents practicing this can transform family dynamics. A child who expects anger but receives calm silence learns that restraint is more powerful than shouting. A partner who expects defense but meets patience feels seen rather than opposed. The discipline also applies to casual conversations. Gossip, criticism, and idle chatter may seem harmless, but they scatter the mind and create karmic entanglement. Noble silence trains you to refrain. Instead of feeding gossip with more words, you quietly step back. Instead of adding negativity, you withhold it. This does not make you distant, it makes you trustworthy. People begin to notice that they feel lighter around you, because your silence does not add to the weight of their minds. One of the greatest powers of noble silence is its ability to create space. Most people feel pressured to fill every pause in conversation, fearing awkwardness. Yet silence in dialogue is not empty, it is fertile. In those pauses, reflection arises. True listening happens, decisions form without haste. By being comfortable with silence, you give others permission to slow down too. Conversations become less about noise and more about connection. This discipline also guards against self-betrayal. How often do people say yes when they want to say no, simply to avoid judgment? Noble silence trains you to pause before responding. In that pause, you recognize your true intention. You may realize that silence itself is the most honest answer. Over time, this practice strengthens integrity because your words become aligned with your inner truth instead of shaped by external pressure. Practicing noble silence in modern life requires courage. Society often equates silence with weakness or lack of knowledge. But the one who remains silent with awareness demonstrates greater strength than the one who reacts compulsively. Historical figures known for wisdom often spoke less, not more. Their silence created gravity, making each word rare and valuable. In your own life, this same gravity emerges when silence becomes your foundation. Technology poses another obstacle. Constant notifications and online chatter feed the impulse to react instantly. Noble silence can be applied here as digital discipline. You pause before posting, before replying, before adding another voice to the noise. You ask if your words bring clarity or if they merely feed distraction. By choosing restraint, you protect your mind from being scattered by endless digital noise. Noble silence also refines thought itself. When you stop speaking unnecessarily, you notice the endless stream of inner dialogue. The mind rehearses conversations, debates itself, narrates every experience. By practicing restraint outwardly, you begin to observe the inner chatter too. Over time, silence seeps inward. The commentary slows. Thought becomes deliberate rather than compulsive. This is the deeper dimension of noble silence, freedom from inner noise as well as outer. The discipline has physiological benefits as well. Constant speaking and reacting keeps the nervous system in a state of alertness. Silence allows the body to return to balance. Heart rate slows, breath deepens, tension softens. Families who practice silent meals together often discover greater calm and connection. Workplaces that allow reflective pauses rather than constant debate cultivate clearer decisions and reduced stress. Silence is medicine for both mind and body. Children learn by example. A household where every frustration is met with shouting breeds more shouting. A household where silence is respected teaches restraint and patience. Parents who model noble silence show their children that not every feeling needs immediate expression. They teach that space can carry wisdom, that listening can be as powerful as speaking. These lessons shape emotional intelligence far more than lectures ever could. Noble silence is also an act of compassion. When you hold back from unnecessary words, you spare others from carrying the burden of your scattered thoughts or harsh reactions. You give them the gift of space. You also protect yourself from regret. Many conflicts arise not from actions, but from careless words spoken in haste. Silence prevents wounds before they form. It is compassion in its most subtle form, the choice to refrain rather than to harm. Yet this discipline does not mean silence always. Noble silence is not avoidance of truth. When words are needed to protect, to guide, to express love, they are offered with clarity. The difference is that now speech arises from awareness, not impulse. When silence is your ground, words become clean, precise, and healing. This is why noble silence is considered noble. It elevates both silence and speech into tools of wisdom. Practical steps help build this discipline. Begin with small moments of silence each day at meals, during commutes, before sleep. Notice the urge to fill space with words, and instead allow silence to remain. In conversations, practice pausing before responding. Let silence stretch without rushing to cover it. Gradually, you become more comfortable with these spaces. At work, set the habit of speaking only when necessary. At home, practice silent listening, giving full presence without interruption. With friends, resist gossip and redirect conversations toward clarity or remain quiet. Over time, the benefits become visible. Relationships grow calmer. Your presence feels grounded. People listen more closely when you do speak. You waste less energy on unnecessary chatter and feel more centered. Your inner world grows quieter as outer restraint trains the mind itself to slow down. This is how noble silence, once a retreat practice, becomes a way of daily living. In essence, noble silence is not about refusing to speak, but about elevating silence to its rightful place. Words lose power when scattered carelessly. Silence restores their value by giving them space. By carrying this discipline into daily life, you protect your energy, strengthen your presence, and bring peace into every environment. Silence ceases to be something rare, practiced only in temples or retreats. It becomes a living practice woven into the fabric of ordinary life. When silence is lived in this way, you begin to see its deeper meaning. It is not just a technique for calm, it is a way of embodying awareness in every interaction. It teaches patience, compassion, and strength. It dissolves unnecessary conflict and cultivates dignity. It nurtures authenticity and protects integrity. In workplaces, it creates clarity. In families, it builds harmony. And within yourself, it opens the door to wisdom. This is the discipline of noble silence. Not absence, but presence. Not withdrawal, but mastery. Not emptiness, but fullness of being. When noble silence becomes a lived discipline, a new understanding reveals itself. You begin to see that holding space, restraining words, and creating clarity are not just for your own benefit. They ripple outward. Your calm changes the room. Your restraint spares others harm. Your silence becomes nourishment for everyone around you. This discovery leads to a deeper truth. Turning inward and focusing on your own growth is not selfishness at all. It is compassion in disguise. By tending to yourself with honesty and discipline, you reduce the suffering you unconsciously spread and open a path for genuine kindness to flow naturally. Self-focus is often misunderstood. Society teaches that focusing on yourself is indulgent, that you must put others first, or risk being called selfish. Yet what happens when you ignore your own needs, neglect your inner growth, or deny your healing? You carry unresolved wounds into every interaction. You pass your frustrations onto others without realizing. You speak from exhaustion instead of clarity. You react from pain instead of peace. What seems like selflessness often becomes hidden harm. Compassion begins within. If your mind is restless, your heart wounded, your body depleted, what can you truly give others? Even your most sincere intentions are clouded when you are not whole. By focusing on your own balance, you create a reservoir of peace that naturally spills outward. When you heal yourself, you stop bleeding onto others. When you discipline your mind, you stop projecting chaos into relationships. Self-focus is the soil from which authentic compassion grows. This does not mean isolation or indifference. It means realizing that you cannot pour from an empty vessel. By tending to your own growth, you become a more stable presence in the lives of others. A parent who cultivates patience within themselves is less likely to pass anger to their children. A partner who learns self-awareness is less likely to project insecurities into the relationship. A leader who practices inner clarity is less likely to spread stress to their team. Self-work is not withdrawal. It is preparation for service that does not harm. The Buddha taught that all beings seek happiness and wish to avoid suffering. Yet much of the suffering people inflict on each other comes not from cruelty, but from unconsciousness. When you carry unhealed pain, you transmit it without meaning to. Silence, reflection, meditation, self-discipline. These are not only for your own liberation, they are acts of compassion because they prevent the cycle of unconscious harm. By focusing on yourself, you break the link between your pain and another's suffering. One of the most powerful aspects of this practice is emotional responsibility. When you take time to understand your anger, sadness, or fear, you stop unloading it onto others. You recognize the emotion as your own work, not someone else's fault to carry. This is compassion in its purest form, choosing not to spread what you have not yet processed. Each time you pause to tend to your inner state instead of reacting outward, you protect others from inheriting your turmoil. Self-focus also means cultivating clarity of intention. Much harm arises not from malice but from acting without awareness. When you take time to reflect on why you act, speak, or give, you prevent false compassion, the kind that seeks validation or control disguised as kindness. True compassion flows when the giver is free of hidden motives. This clarity only comes when you regularly turn inward and question yourself. Caring for your own body and mind is equally important. Exhaustion breeds irritability, and neglect of health becomes a burden others must bear. By caring for your well-being, you practice quiet compassion. You reduce the weight others might have to carry for you. You allow your presence to be lighter, more joyful, less demanding. Self-focus here is not vanity, but responsibility. The responsibility to maintain yourself so that your presence does not drain those around you. In relationships, this truth becomes clear. People often expect others to fill their emptiness, to heal their wounds, to make them whole. This is a heavy demand, one that creates cycles of dependency and resentment. When you focus on your own growth, you free others from carrying the weight of your unmet needs. Love becomes lighter because it is shared between two whole beings rather than used as a bandage for wounds. This is why the most compassionate gift you can offer a partner is to take responsibility for your own healing. In families, the same principle applies. Parents who neglect self-care often pass stress to children. Children who grow up carrying the unprocessed pain of their parents struggle with burdens that are not theirs. When a parent chooses to focus inward to break their own cycles, they end suffering for future generations. Compassion here is not grand gestures, it is the quiet courage to face your own shadows so your children do not inherit them. Even in workplaces, the principle holds. A leader who has not tended to their insecurities will demand constant validation from their team, creating stress. A colleague who has not processed their frustration will spread it in meetings, lowering morale. But when individuals focus on their growth, when they cultivate inner calm and clarity, they create healthier environments for everyone. Self-focus becomes compassion woven into daily structures of life. This practice also transforms how you serve others. Many believe compassion means sacrificing endlessly, giving until nothing remains. But this often leads to burnout, resentment, or hidden anger. True compassion requires sustainability. By tending to your own growth, you ensure that your giving does not deplete you. A candle cannot light others if it burns itself out. Self-focus keeps the flame steady, allowing you to offer warmth without destruction. Buddhism often speaks of the middle path, avoiding extremes of self-indulgence and self-denial. Self-focus as compassion embodies this balance. It is neither selfish absorption nor blind sacrifice. It is the recognition that caring for yourself is inseparable from caring for others, because the quality of your being shapes the quality of your impact. Every thought, word, and action carries energy. If your energy is restless or wounded, you spread suffering. If it is calm and healed, you spread peace. Self-focus also opens the door to deeper empathy. When you know your own pain intimately, you recognize it in others without judgment. Your growth creates understanding. You can hold space for others' struggles without being overwhelmed, because you have tended to your own. This kind of compassion is steady and grounded, not sentimental or reactive. It does not rescue out of guilt, but supports out of strength. Another dimension of this practice is boundaries. Without self-focus, people often give in ways that enable harm, saying yes when they should say no, tolerating what damages them. By focusing inward, you learn your limits. You see that saying no can be the most compassionate act, because it prevents resentment and preserves integrity. Boundaries protect both you and others. They allow your presence to remain genuine rather than forced. Meditation and reflection strengthen this path. By watching the mind, you see clearly how much suffering arises from your own reactions, projections, and clinging. You realize that your growth is the greatest service you can offer, because every step toward awareness reduces unconscious harm. Each breath of clarity is compassion in action, because it lessens the weight you might otherwise place on others. Even in silence, your self-work benefits others. A mind at peace radiates calm that others feel. A heart at ease offers unspoken comfort. Without saying a word, your presence becomes a refuge. This is compassion without effort. It does not depend on doing, but on being. And it begins only when you focus inward, tending to yourself as carefully as you would tend to a loved one. The world often celebrates outward action while neglecting inner work. Yet history shows that the most transformative figures were those who disciplined themselves first. Their compassion was powerful because it was not tangled with ego or unconscious pain. They served without spreading harm because they had already faced their own shadows. This is the path available to anyone. You do not need grand acts to practice compassion. You need the courage to look within and grow. Ultimately, self-focus as compassion is about responsibility. Responsibility for your energy, your reactions, your healing, your presence. It is the recognition that every unhealed wound you ignore becomes someone else's burden. Every step of growth you take lightens the world around you. By tending to yourself, you break cycles of suffering. By focusing inward, you allow compassion to flow outward, untainted. What begins as silence in the mind expands into clarity of being, and from that clarity arises authentic kindness. You no longer confuse self-sacrifice with love or neglect with humility. You see that the most compassionate gift you can offer anyone is a self that is whole, present, and at peace. And this gift begins with the courage to focus inward, not as selfishness, but as compassion in its truest disguise. When self-focus is finally seen as compassion in disguise, the way you interact with others begins to change. You no longer feel the urge to pour yourself out in order to prove love, nor do you demand that others carry the weight of your unrest. From this foundation of inner steadiness arises a deeper awareness. The most powerful form of communication is often the one that does not rely on words at all. Silence itself becomes a language, one that carries truth more directly than speech and reshapes how people experience you. Silence has a force that words rarely hold. In a world where speech is abundant and noise is constant, silence stands out like a clear night sky after endless storms. It unsettles those who expect reaction, it calms those who feel overwhelmed, and it conveys presence in a way that no phrase could achieve. To practice silence as communication is to recognize that not all truths require words to be real. Some truths are felt in the pause, in the stillness, in the refusal to be drawn into noise. This form of communication begins with listening. Most people listen only to respond, preparing their answer even before the other person has finished speaking. Silence interrupts this habit. By remaining quiet, you create space for the other person's words to unfold fully. That space is felt as respect, as validation, as being truly heard. People leave such encounters not remembering your clever responses, but remembering how deeply they felt seen. Silence communicates presence better than any sentence. Silence also communicates boundaries without confrontation. When someone presses you for reaction, your stillness becomes an answer. When manipulation seeks to pull you into its game, your silence shows you will not play. You do not need to argue, to explain, or to defend. Silence itself is refusal, delivered without hostility. In this way, it protects you while preserving dignity for both sides. In relationships, silence often speaks the most tender truths. A moment of shared quiet between loved ones conveys intimacy beyond words. Sitting together without the need to fill space shows a bond that is deeper than chatter. Silence says, "Your presence is enough." It allows love to breathe, free from the pressure of constant verbal reassurance. This type of silence is not distance, it is closeness distilled to its purest form. In conflict, silence becomes transformative. Arguments thrive on reaction, on escalation, on the volley of words. When one person holds silence, the momentum falters. The argument loses fuel. Silence communicates that you refuse to be dragged into cycles that only deepen division. It does not deny your perspective, but asserts your choice to value peace over victory. Over time, this practice reshapes the dynamics of conflict, making space for understanding instead of endless defense. Silence is also a radical equalizer in power dynamics. Those who rely on dominance often use words as weapons, interrupting, lecturing, asserting authority. When you answer such energy with silence, the balance shifts. The absence of reaction unsettles the aggressor. They can no longer feed on resistance. The very act of not speaking becomes a statement of strength. Leaders throughout history have understood this, wielding silence not as passivity but as presence that demands attention. Another dimension of silence as communication is its role in truth-telling. Words can be manipulated, twisted, or misunderstood. Silence leaves less room for distortion. A pause, when asked a dishonest question, a refusal to participate in gossip, a withheld opinion, when others seek validation, all communicate more truth than spoken explanations. Silence allows reality to speak for itself. In this sense, it is not empty but full of integrity. The practice of silence also reveals authenticity. Many people use words to hide, to present masks, to create illusions. When you hold silence, there is no mask to maintain. Your presence communicates itself without the shield of language. This authenticity is often felt by others, even if they cannot explain it. They sense honesty in your quiet, a transparency that words might otherwise cover. Silence is equally powerful in moments of grief and suffering. When someone is in pain, words often fail. Attempts to comfort can sound hollow or forced. Silence, however, holds space for their sorrow without trying to fix it. Simply being there, without commentary, communicates more compassion than any phrase could carry. The grieving heart does not need explanations, it needs presence. Silence is that presence, steady and unbroken. In daily life, silence enhances the value of your speech. When words are scarce, they are treasured. People lean in to hear what you will say because they know it will not be wasted. This is the paradox. By speaking less, you increase the impact of your speech. Silence communicates that your words carry weight, that they are chosen carefully. This changes how others respond to you. Silence also trains you to master timing. Communication is not only about content, but about when words are delivered. A well-placed pause can shift an entire conversation. It allows others to reflect, to reconsider, to process. Silence creates rhythm in dialogue, preventing it from becoming a stream of unchecked noise. Master communicators know that the pause is as important as the sentence. In families, silence can teach lessons no lecture could. A parent's quiet presence during a child's mistake can be more powerful than a barrage of scolding. It communicates disappointment without humiliation, guidance without anger. The child feels the weight of silence more deeply than words that could be dismissed. Silence, when offered with love, becomes a teacher. In workplaces, silence conveys authority. A leader who does not rush to fill every silence with talk is perceived as thoughtful, composed, in control. Their pauses suggest consideration rather than hesitation. Silence communicates that decisions are not made impulsively. This presence inspires confidence, while constant chatter often undermines credibility. Silence is also a radical tool for healing social dynamics. In cultures where voices compete for dominance, choosing not to add more noise can itself be an act of compassion. Refusing to fuel gossip, declining to escalate conflict, withholding judgment, these are silences that heal. They communicate values not through slogans, but through lived restraint. They reshape the environment into one of respect rather than chaos. There is another side to silence that is often overlooked: its ability to reveal truth in others. When you hold silence, others reveal themselves. In the absence of your reaction, they expose their own intentions, their own fears, their own projections. Silence acts like a mirror. It communicates without effort, simply reflecting back what is already present. In this way, silence becomes the sharpest tool of discernment. Silence as communication also nurtures humility. Words often serve the ego's need to display knowledge, to control narratives, to impress. By withholding speech, you let go of that need. You communicate that you do not need to dominate the space. This humility creates openness in others, making them more willing to share and connect. Spiritual practice deepens this understanding. In meditation, silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of awareness. The same applies to communication. When your silence is full of presence, people feel it. It is not withdrawal, but attention sharpened to its purest point. You are there fully, and that fullness communicates more than any phrase. To live this in practice requires discipline. It means resisting the reflex to fill pauses, to explain unnecessarily, to react out of discomfort. It means trusting that silence itself is enough. In conversation, you may find silence difficult at first, fearing awkwardness. But with time, you see that silence is not awkwardness, it is depth. The discomfort dissolves as you recognize the richness it carries. When practiced consistently, silence reshapes your identity in the eyes of others. You are no longer seen as someone who wastes words or reacts impulsively. You are seen as someone whose presence speaks without noise, whose stillness carries meaning. This reputation builds respect without effort. It arises naturally from the discipline of silent communication. At its highest expression, silence becomes a spiritual transmission. Great teachers have often communicated their deepest truths, not through speeches, but through their presence. Students felt transformed simply sitting in silence with them. This is the ultimate form of communication, truth, carried not by sound but by being itself. And though few may reach this level, every step you take towards silence brings you closer to it. Silence as communication is radical because it refuses the world's demand for endless noise. It reshapes relationships by replacing reaction with presence. It shifts power dynamics by dismantling the games of ego. It deepens intimacy by creating space for connection without words. It heals by withholding harm and amplifies truth by refusing distortion. In silence, you speak a language older than words, a language everyone understands but few remember. To live this language daily is to carry a hidden power. You do not need to prove it, display it, or explain it. It radiates in the pauses, in the quiet, in the restraint. Silence communicates not emptiness but depth, not weakness but strength, not withdrawal but love. And when silence becomes your way of speaking, you discover that the world listens more closely than it ever did when you filled it with words. When silence is lived as a language, and not just an absence of sound, a profound realization begins to emerge. You see that communication without words carries truth more powerfully than endless speech. From here, the journey deepens further into a principle that seems almost contradictory: the paradox of non-doing. Buddhism teaches that there is a strength in allowing rather than forcing, in releasing rather than clinging, in stepping back so that life itself can reorganize. What at first feels like inaction reveals itself as the deepest form of wisdom. Non-doing does not mean laziness or neglect. It is not indifference to responsibilities. It is a state where the constant need to control is dropped, where striving is replaced with trust, and where effort is guided by awareness instead of agitation. For most of us, restlessness shows up as the urge to fix, to interfere, to manage outcomes beyond our reach. The paradox is that this grasping rarely creates harmony, it often multiplies chaos. By learning to rest in non-doing, life begins to unfold in ways that grasping could never achieve. The roots of this teaching lie in the understanding of impermanence. Everything in life is already in motion, already shifting. Rivers flow without your command, seasons change without your effort. The body breathes and heals in its own rhythm. When you interfere constantly, you fight the natural current. Non-doing is not passivity, but alignment with this current. It is stepping into harmony with the way things already move, trusting that reality has its own intelligence. This principle becomes clear in the smallest acts. When you let a wound heal without picking at it, the body's wisdom restores itself. When you stop chasing sleep and simply rest, the body drifts into slumber on its own. When you stop forcing a solution to a problem, clarity often arises unexpectedly, in a quiet moment, without pressure. These examples show the paradox. By not grasping, by not striving, you create space for resolution. Non-doing allows natural intelligence to take over. The ego struggles with this because it thrives on control. It believes that without constant effort, life will collapse. But the opposite is true. Constant control tightens knots. Non-doing loosens them. The mind that stops interfering discovers that things have a way of resolving when given space. This is why many of life's breakthroughs occur not in moments of struggle, but in moments of rest, on a walk, in meditation, in silence. The paradox is that stepping back often moves you further than pushing forward. In relationships, non-doing plays a transformative role. Many conflicts persist because each side pushes harder, trying to change the other. The harder the push, the deeper the resistance. When one person practices non-doing, no longer demanding, no longer pressing, space opens. In that space, change becomes possible. Sometimes it is not words or persuasion that heal relationships, but the quiet release of control. Allowing another to be as they are can dissolve tension more effectively than years of argument. The same principle applies to personal growth. Modern culture glorifies constant striving, self-improvement as endless effort. But true growth is not about piling more onto yourself. It is about shedding what is false, letting go of what no longer serves. Meditation itself is a practice of non-doing. You sit, you breathe, you stop chasing. And in that stillness, layers fall away. You grow not because you force growth, but because you allow your deeper nature to surface. Non-doing also shifts your relationship with time. Striving makes you rush, always pushing toward the next milestone. Non-doing brings you into presence. You see that each moment has its own completeness, that you do not need to hurry to arrive elsewhere. This presence is not idleness, it is a fullness of being here and now. The paradox is that by ceasing to chase the future, you actually prepare yourself best for it. Every wise decision is born not from panic, but from presence. One of the greatest challenges is applying this to ambition. People fear that without striving they will lose success. That non-doing means giving up on dreams. But Buddhism does not deny effort, it refines it. Effort that arises from ego's grasping is exhausting and narrow. Effort that arises from non-doing is natural, effortless in quality, because it aligns with conditions rather than forcing them. You plant seeds, you water them, but you do not tug at the sprouts to make them grow. The growth happens on its own. In daily life, this practice can be subtle. Non-doing might mean pausing before sending a message, giving space for clarity instead of reacting instantly. It might mean stepping back from a heated debate, letting silence cool the fire instead of fueling it. It might mean taking a walk when stuck on a problem, trusting that solutions come when the mind is not strangled by pressure. Each act of non-doing is a reminder that life has its own rhythm, and you are not separate from it. The paradox extends to compassion as well. Helping others does not always mean intervening. Sometimes the most compassionate act is to step back, to allow someone their space to struggle and grow. Overhelping often weakens rather than strengthens. Non-doing communicates trust in their ability to find their way. In this sense, non-doing is not abandonment, but respect for the natural unfolding of another's path. Non-doing also dissolves anxiety. Much of anxiety comes from over-management, from trying to control outcomes that are not in your hands. By releasing this habit, you reclaim peace. You recognize that certain currents are larger than you, and your role is not to control but to navigate. This acceptance is not defeat, it is liberation. Anxiety weakens when you stop trying to dominate what cannot be dominated. The body teaches this lesson naturally. Breath flows without effort. Digestion occurs without command. The heart beats without instruction. Life sustains itself through countless acts of non-doing. When you align with this truth, you live with less resistance. You realize that the same intelligence guiding your breath is guiding the larger flow of your life. Trusting it is not neglect, but wisdom. Art and creativity thrive on this paradox. Many artists speak of breakthroughs arriving not during forced effort, but in moments of rest, when they stop pushing. Writers find clarity after stepping away from the page. Musicians hear melodies in silence. Creativity is the fruit of allowing, not of clinging. Non-doing opens the channel for inspiration to flow. Nature embodies this wisdom fully. Trees do not strain to grow. They rise naturally toward the sunday. Rivers do not force their path. They carve it patiently through persistence. Flowers do not hurry to bloom. They open when the season is right. Non-doing is written into every part of existence. To practice it is not to reject effort, but to align with the natural pace of things, trusting timing rather than forcing it. Meditation deepens this understanding. When you sit and release the compulsion to manipulate your experience, you witness how thoughts, sensations, and emotions arise and pass on their own. Non-doing reveals impermanence directly. You see that clinging creates suffering while letting go reveals peace. This experience cannot be learned. Intellectually, it must be lived. In meditation, you discover that non-doing is not emptiness, but fullness, the richness of awareness unobstructed by control. Non-doing also has a moral dimension. Much harm arises from acting out of haste, from forcing decisions without clarity. By practicing restraint, you avoid planting seeds of regret. You allow situations to unfold until the right action becomes clear. Non-doing is not inaction. It is waiting until action arises from wisdom rather than impulse. This patience prevents harm and deepens trust in yourself. In leadership, non-doing creates trust. A leader who micromanages suffocates growth. One who practices non-doing provides guidance, but allows space for others to act. This space empowers creativity, responsibility, and initiative. Non-doing here is not neglect, but faith in the capacity of others. It communicates respect and cultivates strength in the community. The paradox also applies to healing. Emotional wounds often resist when forced. The harder you try to push away grief, the more it clings. The more you demand happiness, the further it recedes. Healing happens when you stop forcing and allow feelings to move at their own pace. Non-doing here is gentle patience with yourself, trusting that the heart, like the body, knows how to restore balance if given time and space. Ultimately, the Buddhist paradox of non-doing reveals a hidden strength. When you stop grasping, life takes care of much on its own. When you stop forcing, clarity rises naturally. When you stop interfering, harmony appears. What seems like inaction is in fact the most aligned action. It is not withdrawal from life, but participation in its deeper intelligence. Non-doing teaches that focusing on yourself does not always mean effort or striving. Sometimes it means stepping back, letting the current carry you, and discovering that the river already knows the way. To live this paradox is to live with trust. Trust that you are not separate from the flow of life. Trust that when you release control, you gain clarity. Trust that by doing less, you often achieve more. In this trust lies freedom. You no longer exhaust yourself chasing what will come in its own time. You no longer cling to control that was never yours. You rest in alignment, and in that rest, life realigns itself around you. This is the paradox the Buddha pointed to, that true strength is found not in grasping but in letting go, not in constant doing but in knowing when to allow. And in this way, non-doing becomes the highest form of wisdom, guiding you gently toward peace. When the paradox of non-doing begins to unfold in your life, something subtle yet extraordinary becomes visible. You notice that the greatest transformations are not found in the rush of effort, but in the stillness that allows things to align themselves. From here, the mind becomes sharper, able to witness not just the broad strokes of thought, but the spaces between them. It is in those brief intervals, the gaps where silence emerges, that karma loosens its grip. These micro-moments hold the power to dissolve cycles that have chained you for years, offering freedom in the most unexpected place, the quiet pause between one thought and the next. Most people live in an unbroken stream of thought, like a river that never rests. One idea pulls the next, one memory triggers another, and in this chain, reactions are born. Within those reactions, karma is continually created. A thought of anger becomes a word, the word becomes an action, and the action plants a seed that will return to you. Yet if the chain is broken, if silence enters even for a breath, the seed is not planted. The cycle dissolves before it begins. This is why the space between thoughts is sacred. It is the doorway out of unconscious repetition. Awareness is the key to noticing these spaces. Without awareness, the mind rushes past them, filling every gap with another distraction. But when you slow down, when you begin to rest in silence, you notice there is always a pause. After an exhale, there is a stillness before the next inhale. After a thought, there is a moment before the next arises. These moments are small but powerful. They are not empty voids. They are fertile ground where freedom can be born. The Buddha taught that karma is created when intention solidifies into action. But in the space between thoughts, intention has not yet hardened. You may feel anger arise, but if you rest in the pause, it dissolves before becoming speech. You may feel fear, but if you sit in the stillness, it passes before shaping your choice. This is how awareness in the gap dissolves karma. It prevents unconscious reactions from forming chains. Meditation reveals this directly. As you sit, thoughts arise again and again. At first you feel trapped, drowning in them. But with patience you notice the small silences between thoughts. You begin to rest there. Instead of chasing every idea, you allow them to pass. The more you train, the more these spaces expand. They become wide enough to hold awareness itself. In this awareness, you see thoughts as passing clouds rather than commands. The grip of karma weakens because you no longer follow every impulse. These pauses are also places of renewal. When you rest in the space between thoughts, you experience a clarity untouched by past or future. For a brief moment, you are free from memory and expectation. You are not the roles you play, not the stories you repeat, but pure awareness. This awareness is not bound by karma because it does not cling. It sees without grasping. It feels without attachment. Each time you rest here, you step outside the wheel of cause and effect. In daily life, this practice becomes invaluable. Consider the moment before you reply to criticism. If you rush, words of defense or anger pour out, planting new seeds of conflict. But if you pause, even for a breath, you see the thought of defense arise and pass. In that silence, you choose differently. The space between thoughts becomes your shield, protecting you from entanglement. This is not suppression, it is freedom. You are no longer a slave to impulse, but master of your own energy. The spaces also reveal the impermanence of thought itself. Every idea, no matter how powerful, fades. Awareness of the gaps shows you that thoughts are not continuous, not as solid as they appear. This recognition dissolves the illusion that your mind defines you. You are not the stream of thoughts, but the awareness that notices the gaps. Karma depends on identification. When you believe you are the thought, you act it out. When you see you are the awareness, the cycle breaks. Over time, the pauses grow longer. You find yourself resting in silence, not only during meditation, but throughout the day. Walking, eating, listening, you notice moments where the mind does not rush. These micro-moments accumulate into a new way of being. Instead of reacting unconsciously, you respond with clarity. Life becomes lighter, not because problems vanish, but because you no longer bind yourself to them through compulsive thought. This space also nurtures compassion. When you are caught in thought, you see only your perspective, your desires, your pain. In the silence between thoughts, you glimpse a wider view. You recognize others as sharing the same struggles, the same impermanence. Compassion arises naturally because the silence frees you from self-centered narratives. It is in the pauses that the heart opens, no longer blocked by constant mental noise. Science supports this ancient wisdom. Studies on mindfulness show that the brain's reactivity lessens when people learn to pause between stimulus and response. Neural patterns associated with anger or fear lose their strength when interrupted by awareness. This is the modern language of what Buddhism has always taught. The space between thoughts is where transformation begins. The pause rewires not only your mind, but your destiny. Even creativity is born here. When the mind stops its constant chatter, inspiration arises. Many great discoveries happened not during frantic thought, but during quiet moments of stillness. The space between thoughts is where intuition speaks. It is where deeper intelligence emerges, unblocked by noise. By resting in the gaps, you align with a wisdom beyond the limits of ordinary thinking. The discipline of living with awareness of these spaces requires patience. The mind resists silence, rushing to fill every gap. At first, the spaces seem too small, too fleeting. But every time you notice one, you strengthen your capacity. The more you rest in them, the more they reveal. Eventually, you discover that the space is not small at all. It is vast, limitless, the true nature of mind. Thoughts come and go within it, like birds crossing the sky, but the sky itself remains untouched. This recognition dissolves the deepest layers of karma. You see that your essence is not bound by actions of the past or fears of the future. Karma belongs to the movement of thought, to the patterns of reaction. But in the space of awareness, you are free. Each moment you rest there, you weaken the pull of old habits. Each pause becomes a liberation. Karma dissolves, not because the past changes, but because you no longer fuel it with identification. Living this way reshapes every aspect of life. Relationships grow calmer because you no longer react blindly. Work becomes clearer because you respond from awareness instead of stress. Even solitude feels different because you are no longer trapped in restless thought. You discover a peace that does not depend on circumstances, but on your ability to rest in silence. The space between thoughts is not a mystical idea. It is a practical refuge available at any time. A breath before speaking, a pause before acting, a moment of awareness in the midst of daily noise. These are the gateways. Each one prevents the creation of unnecessary karma. Each one dissolves cycles that would otherwise continue. The more you practice, the more natural it becomes, until silence becomes woven into your way of being. In the end, the greatest secret is simple. Freedom is not found in more effort, more control, more striving. It is found in the quiet pauses that life is already offering you. The space between thoughts is not nothing, it is everything. It is where awareness lives, where karma dissolves, where peace begins. To notice it is to step off the wheel of endless cause and effect and rest in the timeless ground of being itself. And the more you live from this space, the more life realigns itself around clarity, compassion, and freedom. When you begin to rest in the spaces between thoughts, the mind reveals its hidden architecture. You see clearly that silence itself is not a gap to be feared, but the foundation of freedom, the place where karma dissolves before it takes shape. Once this discovery has been touched, a deeper question naturally arises. If silence can free you from the prison of thought, what happens when you train the ear of the mind to listen not only to sound, but to the silence that surrounds it? This shift is the essence of listening to emptiness, hearing beyond noise, beyond words, into the vastness that holds everything yet clings to nothing. Listening to emptiness is not about rejecting sound, but about expanding awareness to include what sound arises from and what it returns to. Every note of music rests on silence. Every word depends on quiet to carry meaning. Every sound eventually dissolves into stillness. Yet most people focus only on the noise and miss the ground that gives it life. By learning to listen differently, you begin to notice that silence is not absence, but presence, a subtle fullness more profound than any sound could offer. The practice begins by shifting your attention during ordinary listening. When someone speaks, you hear their words, but you also notice the silence before and after each sentence. In music, you pay attention not only to melody but to the rests between notes, the pauses that shape rhythm. Even in the world's noise, there are always pockets of quiet, the hush between traffic, the stillness after a bird's call. Listening to these spaces changes perception. The world no longer feels overwhelming. It becomes balanced, sound and silence woven together as one. This training opens insight, because silence carries truths, sound cannot. Sound is transient, constantly arising and fading. Silence is steady, always present beneath the noise. When you listen deeply, you recognize that silence is the background of existence itself. It reveals impermanence directly. No sound lasts, yet silence remains. This recognition is not intellectual, but experiential. Each time you hear the stillness behind sound, you touch the timeless. Listening to emptiness also refines concentration. The mind normally jumps from sound to sound, grasping at words, evaluating, judging. But when you anchor awareness in silence, distraction weakens. You no longer chase every noise but rest in the space that holds them all. This steadiness trains the mind in equanimity. Instead of being pushed around by pleasant or unpleasant sounds, you remain centered in the silence that is unchanged. In meditation, this practice becomes a doorway to profound calm. You sit, and instead of fighting with thoughts or chasing stillness, you open the mind to listening. You hear sounds around you without clinging. You notice the silence beneath them. Slowly the focus shifts from content to context, from noise to the field in which noise arises. This field is vast, open, and clear. By resting there, you discover that the mind itself is like space, boundless, empty of solidity, yet able to hold everything. This realization transforms how you relate to the world. In conversations, you no longer rush to fill silence. You listen beyond words, sensing meaning in pauses, in what is unsaid. You discover that true communication is not only in speech, but in presence. Silence speaks of sincerity, of trust, of authenticity. When you train yourself to hear emptiness, you connect with people at a level deeper than language. Listening to emptiness also dissolves reactivity. Harsh words lose some of their sting when you notice the silence they are suspended in. Praise does not inflate the ego as easily. When you recognize it arises and passes like every other sound. By listening to the silence between, you weaken attachment to both criticism and flattery. Life becomes lighter, not because sound ceases, but because you are no longer bound by it. The practice has practical effects in stressful environments. In busy workplaces filled with chatter and demands, listening to emptiness provides a refuge. Even in the middle of noise, you can shift attention to the stillness between sounds, a reminder that beneath chaos there is always space. This perspective calms the nervous system, lowers reactivity, and restores focus. It is a portable sanctuary available anywhere. In families, this awareness deepens intimacy. A parent who listens not only to a child's words but to the silences that follow shows genuine presence. A partner who allows quiet between conversations creates trust instead of pressure. Silence in relationships becomes a shared ground, a reminder that connection is not measured by words but by the depth of listening. Spiritual traditions across the world point to this truth. Mystics have long said that God, truth, or ultimate reality, is heard not in noise but in silence. The Upanishads call it the soundless sound, the vibration that underlies all creation. Zen masters point students to the sound of one hand clapping, a riddle that directs attention beyond the obvious to emptiness itself. Buddhism describes emptiness not as void but as openness, the condition that allows all forms to appear. Listening to emptiness is to train the ear of wisdom to perceive this openness directly. This training also reveals your own inner patterns. When you listen deeply, you notice how quickly the mind fills silence with its own commentary. Instead of letting silence be, thoughts rush in to cover it. By observing this habit, you recognize how uncomfortable the ego is with emptiness. It fears losing itself in the vastness. Yet by returning again and again to listening, you teach the mind to relax. Slowly it learns that emptiness is not loss but freedom. Listening to emptiness is a form of letting go. You stop chasing meaning in every sound and instead rest in the awareness that holds it all. This release creates clarity. Insights arise not from constant analysis, but from the stillness between. Solutions come, creativity blossoms, and intuition awakens in the quiet space you have learned to notice. In practical terms, you can train this skill in simple ways. Throughout the day, pause and notice the silence before a sound, the stillness after it. When listening to music, shift attention to the rests as much as the notes. In conversations, practice being fully present without rushing to reply. At night, notice the quiet that wraps around the world as you fall asleep. Each practice strengthens the mind's capacity to hear beyond noise into the deeper presence of silence. Over time, this way of listening reshapes identity itself. You no longer define yourself by the noise of thoughts, words, or judgments. You recognize that, like sounds, identities arise and pass, but the silence beneath them remains untouched. This recognition is liberation. You are not the noise of your mind. You are the awareness that hears it, steady and unchanging. The more you live this practice, the more you sense silence even in noise. The city's chaos is punctuated by moments of stillness. Conversations carry pauses that hold meaning. Even the loudest environments rest on a ground of quiet. This realization dissolves the idea that peace requires external silence. True peace is the ability to hear emptiness everywhere, to find the stillness beneath sound, no matter the conditions. Listening to emptiness also cultivates humility. You realize that most of what is essential in life cannot be spoken. Love, presence, trust, truth. These are felt in silence more than expressed in words. By honoring silence, you honor what cannot be captured by language. You stop trying to dominate with speech and instead let presence speak. This humility deepens into wisdom. The more you train to hear silence, the more you understand impermanence and emptiness. Sounds pass, words fade, but silence remains. Everything arises and falls back into this openness. By living in awareness of it, you step closer to the truth the Buddha pointed to. That emptiness is not nothingness, but the boundless ground of being. Ultimately, listening to emptiness is listening to life itself. It is training the mind to notice what is usually overlooked, to value the invisible as much as the visible. It is a discipline of presence, a refinement of awareness, and a path to freedom. Each pause, each space, each silence becomes a teacher, and in hearing beyond words, you discover a truth that no words could ever fully express, that emptiness is not absence, but the very fullness of reality itself. When the practice of listening to emptiness becomes natural, you begin to sense that silence is not only a refuge, but also a mirror. The same quiet that reveals the stillness beneath sound now starts to reflect back what has long been hidden. In the absence of noise, distractions fall away, and what remains is the raw truth of your inner world. Solitude does not just soothe, it exposes. Silence begins to show you your unconscious shadows, the attachments you cling to, the emotions you suppress, the patterns of ego you deny. Most people avoid silence because of this very reason. Noise is easier. It covers the discomfort, drowns out the whispers of unresolved pain, and fills the space where uncomfortable truths might rise. But when you remove the layers of sound and activity, there is nothing left to protect you from yourself. The loneliness that surfaces in solitude is not emptiness, it is the first glimpse of the shadow. This is the part of the self that has been hidden, waiting to be seen. Hidden attachments often rise first. You may notice how restless you become without a phone, a television, or constant interaction. The urge to reach for distraction is not random. It reveals how dependent you have become on external stimulation for comfort. The silence shows you the craving. You begin to see the attachment not as something harmless, but as a chain that binds your attention. Each time you sit without reaching, the craving becomes visible, and in that visibility lies the chance for release. Suppressed emotions also emerge in solitude. Anger you thought had vanished reappears. Grief you buried resurfaces. Fear you denied becomes loud in the quiet. These emotions were never gone. They were simply pushed beneath the noise of daily life. Silence removes the cover, and suddenly the weight you carried unknowingly becomes clear. Though uncomfortable, this is healing. By facing the emotions directly, without distraction, you allow them to move and dissolve, instead of remaining trapped in your body and mind. The ego, too, reveals its patterns in silence. When there is no one to impress, no one to argue with, no audience to maintain, you notice how much of your identity depends on external validation. You may feel unease, as though without others watching you do not exist. This is the ego's fragility exposed. Silence shows you the subtle ways you create stories about yourself, how you constantly narrate your importance, how you build images to feel secure. Alone and quiet, those images crumble, and the raw truth of impermanence surfaces. This reflection is not punishment, it is a gift. Without the mirror of silence, the shadow remains hidden, shaping your life unconsciously. Attachments drive your choices. Suppressed emotions leak into relationships. Ego tendencies create conflict, and yet you do not see the cause. Solitude brings light to these hidden forces. Once revealed, they lose their grip. Awareness itself begins the process of transformation. The process can feel overwhelming at first. Sitting alone in silence may bring waves of discomfort, even fear. The urge to escape can be strong, yet if you remain steady, something shifts. You begin to realize that what arises in silence cannot destroy you. It is simply the truth asking to be seen. Each time you face it without running, you build resilience. Over time, what once felt unbearable becomes a path of liberation. Buddhist practice calls this insight into the nature of the self. The shadow is not an enemy, but part of the illusion of a fixed identity. Attachments show how much you cling to impermanent things. Suppressed emotions reveal the cost of avoidance. Ego tendencies expose the false belief in a permanent self. By facing these truths in silence, you see through the illusions that create suffering. The shadow becomes teacher. This reflection is not limited to formal meditation. It happens in daily life whenever you create space for solitude. A walk alone without music, sitting quietly at the end of the day, or simply pausing in the midst of activity. Each moment of silence has the potential to reveal what you have ignored. If you resist filling these spaces, the mirror begins to work. You start to see patterns that have shaped you for years without awareness. In relationships, this self-examination is crucial. Many conflicts are not caused by others, but by your own shadows projected outward. Anger toward a partner may be rooted in old wounds, not their actions. Jealousy may arise from insecurity, not reality. Silence shows you this. By facing your own shadow, you prevent it from spilling onto others. This is compassion in its truest form, not harming others with the parts of yourself you have refused to face. The mirror of silence also reveals subtle habits of thought. You may notice a tendency to replay conversations, to construct arguments, to anticipate criticism. These habits drain energy and perpetuate cycles of suffering. Alone and quiet, you see them clearly, and once seen, they begin to lose power. You realize that much of your suffering is self-created, sustained only by unconscious repetition. The recognition itself weakens the cycle. This work requires courage. To face suppressed pain and ego illusions is not easy, but silence provides the safest ground for this work. Unlike the outside world, silence does not judge. It simply reflects. It shows what is there without distortion. Your task is to remain present, to witness without turning away. This witnessing is itself healing. The shadow loses its power when it is brought into the light of awareness. Over time, the fear of silence fades. What once felt threatening becomes liberating. You see that your attachments can be released, your emotions can be felt and let go. Your ego does not need constant reinforcement. Silence becomes less of a mirror for pain and more of a mirror for truth. You begin to recognize the depth of your being beyond the shadow. What remains is clarity, strength, and peace. The wisdom of solitude has been known by sages across traditions. They retreated not to escape the world, but to see themselves clearly. In caves, forests, and deserts, they met their shadows face to face. Their insight came not from running, but from sitting still long enough for the truth to reveal itself. This same path is available in daily life. You do not need mountains or temples, only the willingness to sit in silence and let the mirror show you what is there. The deeper you go, the more you understand that the shadow is not separate from light. Attachments, suppressed emotions, and ego tendencies all arise from the same source, the mind grasping at impermanence. By seeing this clearly in silence, you transcend the struggle. You no longer fear what arises. You recognize that every shadow is simply a call to awareness. The mirror reflects, you see, and in seeing, you are free. Silence as a mirror is both challenge and blessing. It strips away illusions, it confronts you with what you have hidden, and it demands honesty. But it also offers the possibility of liberation no external teacher can give. By facing yourself fully, you dissolve the forces that unconsciously drive your suffering. Solitude is not emptiness, it is clarity. And in that clarity, you find the strength to live authentically, free from the shadows that once ruled from the dark. When silence reveals the shadow, you begin to see how much of life is shaped by unconscious clinging. Attachments, suppressed feelings, and ego illusions all surface, showing how deeply you rely on external anchors for identity and comfort. Yet as these truths come into the light, another question arises. How do you live in the world once you recognize the grip of attachment? Do you retreat completely, cutting ties to avoid suffering? Or do you stay engaged and risk being pulled back into old patterns? The Buddha's answer was the middle path: detachment without isolation. It is the art of withdrawing inwardly while remaining connected outwardly, a balance that keeps you free without turning you cold. Detachment in this sense is not indifference. It does not mean rejecting life, avoiding people, or refusing to care. It means loosening the grip of need. When you are detached, you can love without clinging, work without being consumed, and live without being enslaved by every rise and fall. Isolation pushes others away, but detachment brings you closer in a healthier way. You connect not because you need constant validation, but because your presence is whole. This practice begins with awareness of how attachment shapes behavior. In relationships, Attachment often hides behind the word love. You may believe that caring means holding tightly, controlling outcomes, or expecting others to complete you. But silence and self-reflection reveal the truth. This is not love, but dependency. Detachment does not diminish love. It purifies it. When you stop clinging, affection becomes freer, respect deepens, and the bond is lighter. Love becomes an offering, not a demand. In daily life, detachment also transforms how you relate to possessions and success. The world constantly tells you that identity is tied to what you own or achieve. The more you grasp, the more fear arises, fear of loss, fear of failure. Detachment is not rejecting wealth or goals, but relating to them without chains. You can work hard, create, and enjoy, but you do not collapse if things change. You remain steady, whether praised or criticized, whether fortune rises or falls. This steadiness is the fruit of inward withdrawal without outer rejection. The middle path is essential because extremes create imbalance. Complete withdrawal into isolation may protect you from pain, but also cuts you off from the richness of human experience. Total immersion in the world without detachment leaves you enslaved by its ups and downs. The Buddha warned against both extremes. The middle path teaches that freedom comes not from running away, but from walking through life with balance, engaged yet unbound. In practice, this means cultivating an inner space that is untouched, even while you move through noise and responsibility. Meditation trains this capacity. You learn to return to the center again and again, noticing thoughts, emotions, and external pressures without clinging. Over time, this calm begins to accompany you everywhere. In conversations, you are present but not reactive. In work, you are committed but not consumed. In relationships, you are loving but not dependent. This is detachment without isolation, lived in daily action. Detachment also changes how you face loss. When you are attached, loss feels like the end of yourself. You collapse because you had fused your identity with what is gone. Detachment allows grief to flow without destroying you. You mourn but do not lose your center. You acknowledge impermanence without resisting it. This does not make you cold, it makes you resilient. You can comfort others not by denying pain, but by showing that peace is possible even in the midst of it. In community, life detachment is equally vital. Social ties often pressure people into conformity, into adopting values and opinions simply to belong. Detachment allows you to remain part of society without being swallowed by it. You can participate without losing your voice, contribute without being enslaved by group identity. This balance allows compassion to flourish. You care for others not because you fear rejection, but because your connection is genuine. The practice also prevents burnout. Many who serve others fall into exhaustion because they attach their worth to constant giving. Detachment teaches you to serve without clinging to results. You act from compassion, not from the need to be needed. You give fully, but when the outcome is not as hoped, you release it. This protects your energy and allows your service to remain sustainable. Detachment without isolation also transforms how you listen. When you are attached to being right or being seen, conversations become battles of ego. With detachment, you hear others without needing to control their view. You respond with clarity, but without compulsion to dominate. This creates respect and openness. Ironically, detachment allows deeper connection because it removes the noise of ego. The discipline requires honesty. Many claim detachment while secretly hiding behind isolation. They withdraw to avoid facing pain, masking fear as wisdom. True detachment faces life directly, without running. It stays engaged but free, compassionate yet centered. It requires courage to remain in the world without clinging to it. But each time you practice, you prove that freedom does not require escape, Buddhism describes this state as being in the world, but not of the world. Like a lotus that grows in muddy water, yet remains unstained, you live among conditions but are not bound by them. This image captures the essence of detachment without isolation. The lotus does not reject the mud, it uses it as nourishment. Likewise, you do not reject society, relationships, or responsibilities, you grow through them, using them as the field where your wisdom blossoms. In practical terms, detachment without isolation can be cultivated through small acts. Begin by observing your emotional pull in everyday situations. Notice when you feel the need to control, to explain, to cling. Instead of acting on it, pause, create inner space. In relationships, allow others to be as they are, without demanding constant reassurance. In work, focus fully on the task, but release attachment to results. In possessions, enjoy them, but remember they are temporary. Each act strengthens the habit of engagement without chains. Over time, this practice reshapes your life. Relationships feel lighter, responsibilities less heavy, successes less intoxicating, losses less devastating. You discover a steadiness that is not dependent on circumstances. People sense your presence as calming, trustworthy, authentic. You are connected, yet free. This freedom is not cold detachment, but warm balance, allowing you to love more deeply because you no longer cling. The path of detachment without isolation is not about leaving the world, but about meeting it differently. You no longer mistake impermanent things for permanent security. You no longer confuse clinging with love or constant striving with meaning. You walk through society with open hands, willing to give and receive but not enslaved by either. This is the middle path, the balance that brings both freedom and connection. In the end, the lesson is simple yet profound. You do not need to retreat to mountains to be free. Freedom is cultivated in the heart, in the ability to withdraw inwardly while remaining present outwardly. Detachment without isolation is the art of living fully engaged in the world while rooted in a center that nothing can shake. It is the strength to care without clinging, to act without grasping, to belong without losing yourself. And it is in this balance that the beauty of the middle path reveals itself as the way to peace. When detachment without isolation becomes part of your life, you start to see how freedom and connection can coexist. You remain present in relationships, in work, in society, but no longer chained by the weight of constant craving or fear. This balance naturally leads to another insight. True transformation is not shaped by the loud choices everyone sees, but by the quiet, invisible decisions you make each day. It is not the declarations of what you will become that carve your path, but the silent self-discipline that no one applauds. These unspoken choices, what you eat, how you spend your attention, what habits you cultivate, carry the subtle power to reshape your destiny in ways more profound than public promises ever could. The strength of unspoken choices lies in their consistency. Public resolutions may create excitement, but they fade when not backed by daily discipline. The food you choose at dinner, the way you begin your morning, the thoughts you allow your mind to linger on, these are the true architects of your future. They are quiet, often unnoticed by others, but they build momentum that over time becomes unstoppable. Like water carving valleys through mountains, small, consistent actions reshape the landscape of your life. Diet offers a clear example. Every bite is a choice that communicates to your body. Food is not only fuel, it is a message, telling your system whether to strengthen or weaken, to restore or inflame. You do not need to announce your diet to the world. The quiet decision to nourish yourself with balance is itself a discipline that transforms how you feel, think, and act. Over months and years, this silent practice shapes not only health, but also clarity of mind and steadiness of emotion. The body becomes a vessel aligned with awareness, Habits extend this principle. They are often invisible to others, yet they determine the quality of your life. The choice to rise early, to read instead of scroll, to pause before reacting, these small acts accumulate silently. No one praises you for resisting distraction, but each time you do, you strengthen focus. No one notices when you refrain from gossip, but each time you hold back, you preserve dignity and trust. These are the quiet victories that build character. They may never be announced, but their power is felt in the life they create. Attention is perhaps the most subtle yet powerful field of unspoken choice. Where you place awareness shapes everything. To feed constant distraction is to scatter your life force. To direct attention with care is to concentrate your energy into clarity and purpose. Choosing not to dwell on negativity, choosing to focus on gratitude, choosing to observe rather than react. These are silent acts of discipline. They require no declaration, but over time they determine whether your mind becomes a sanctuary or a battlefield. The Buddhist path has always emphasized the unseen over the seen. It is not outward displays of spirituality that free you, but the quiet discipline of the mind. Meditation itself is a practice of unspoken choice, choosing to sit, to breathe, to observe rather than follow thoughts. Each session may seem small, yet the cumulative power reshapes the structure of your consciousness. Destiny is not in grand gestures, but in repeated choices to return to awareness again and again. These silent disciplines also protect you from the traps of ego. Public declarations often serve to inflate identity, telling others what you plan to do, creating an image of discipline without embodying it. Unspoken choices bypass this trap. They are not about image, but reality. You eat quietly, you rise consistently, you focus silently. The ego does not grow because there is no audience. Instead, transformation happens from within, steady and authentic. This principle applies equally in relationships. Loud promises of loyalty or change mean little without consistent silent action. Choosing patience instead of irritation, respect instead of dismissal, presence instead of distraction, these daily acts build trust far more than words. Over time, the quiet strength of your choices becomes evident. Relationships do not thrive on dramatic declarations, but on the invisible fabric woven from unspoken discipline. The power of unspoken choices also lies in their alignment with impermanence. Life is built from moments, not from occasional grand events. By tending carefully to each moment, you align yourself with reality. Every bite, every breath, every thought becomes an opportunity to shape the future. This mindfulness transforms destiny not through control but through steady presence. The cumulative weight of small, silent choices carries more force than the fleeting spark of dramatic announcements. History shows that great lives were built not only on public acts, but on unseen discipline. Philosophers, monks, leaders, and artists cultivated habits in solitude that no one witnessed. Their greatness was not the product of sudden inspiration, but of countless silent choices aligning over years. This pattern is available to anyone. You do not need recognition to transform your life. You need discipline in the unseen moments when no one is watching. These choices also reveal integrity. When you act in ways consistent with your values, even without witnesses, you build trust with yourself. You no longer need external validation because you know your strength comes from within. This self-trust is unshakable. It creates confidence that is calm rather than boastful, grounded rather than fragile. The quiet power of unspoken choices builds a foundation that no storm can erode. Unspoken discipline also cultivates humility. Because no one sees, there is no pride to inflate. The practice itself becomes its own reward. You choose well not for applause, but because you recognize the long-term effect on your life. This humility deepens your presence. People feel it not through what you say, but through the calm, steady energy you carry. The subtlety of these choices also teaches patience. Dramatic change often collapses under its own weight, but gradual, silent change endures. You learn to value progress measured in years rather than days. You discover that transformation is not about speed, but about direction. Each silent step sets a trajectory that reshapes your life without drama. Patience itself becomes a discipline, chosen again and again in the quiet. These choices extend beyond personal benefit. Silent self-discipline reduces suffering for others as well. When you eat mindfully, you become healthier and less dependent on others to carry your burdens. When you train your habits, you create a stable presence that calms those around you. When you discipline your attention, you respond with clarity instead of reactivity, protecting others from unnecessary harm. Silent choices ripple outward, shaping not only your destiny, but the lives of those you touch. The deeper lesson is that destiny is not an accident, but the result of thousands of choices, most of them invisible. Each one is a seed planted in the soil of your life. Public words may impress for a moment, but seeds are planted in silence. The harvest comes from what you choose in private, not what you declare in public. This truth is both empowering and humbling. It places responsibility in your hands at every moment. Buddhism teaches that liberation itself is cultivated through countless small acts of discipline, ethical choices, mindful actions, silent restraint. Each act may seem minor, but together they reshape the mind, dissolving ignorance and planting wisdom. This path is not loud. It is built on unspoken choices repeated steadily over time. That is why its power is so great. In the end, the life you create is not determined by what you announce, but by what you practice. It is shaped in the kitchen, in the morning routine, in the moments when you choose to breathe instead of react, to focus instead of scatter. These unspoken choices are the architects of destiny. They do not need to be declared because their results speak louder than words ever could. And when you live with this awareness, you discover that the quiet discipline of daily life is the most powerful force for transformation you will ever know. The strength of unspoken choices shows that destiny is not shaped by noise, but by the quiet acts of discipline that no one sees. When this truth takes root, another layer of wisdom unfolds. You begin to notice how much of modern suffering comes not from hunger or danger, but from comparison. The endless measuring of yourself against others, the craving for recognition, the subtle competition for worth, all of it drains peace and blinds you to your own path. The antidote is not found in competing harder, but in turning inward. Self-focus, rooted in Buddhist reflection, becomes the medicine that dissolves envy, competition, and the addiction to external validation. Comparison is woven deeply into human culture. From childhood, people are taught to measure themselves against peers, grades, appearance, possessions, achievements. The message is clear. Your value lies in being better than someone else. Yet this race never ends, because there will always be someone with more wealth, more beauty, more success, more recognition. The chase becomes a prison. Envy corrodes joy. Competition replaces connection, and validation from others becomes a drug that must be constantly renewed. Buddhism cuts to the root of this suffering by turning the gaze inward. Instead of asking how you compare to another, the practice asks, how well do you know yourself? Where are your thoughts leading you? What attachments keep you restless? What habits create clarity or confusion? These questions shift the ground entirely. The focus is no longer on outrunning others, but on awakening within. This is not selfishness, it is liberation. The more you see yourself clearly, the less power comparison has over you. Self-focus reveals that envy is born from illusion. When you compare your life to someone else's, you see only fragments, not the whole picture. You see their highlight, but not their struggle, their surface, but not their depth. Silence and self-reflection expose the futility of envy by showing that every being carries impermanence, suffering, and longing. No one's life is perfect, and no comparison is complete. When this truth is seen directly, envy weakens. You begin to wish others well instead of resenting them, because you understand that joy cannot be stolen, it must be cultivated within. Competition, too, begins to dissolve under self-focus. In reflection, you notice how striving to outshine others fuels restlessness. The victory never satisfies because the ego always wants more. Self-focus shifts the question from "Am I ahead?" to "Am I aligned?" You measure progress not against others but against your own clarity, your own growth. This subtle change transforms energy. Instead of chasing shadows, you invest in steady development. The pressure to dominate fades, replaced by the peace of walking your own path. External validation loses its grip through the same process. When you examine the craving for approval, you see its emptiness. Praise feels good briefly but fades quickly, leaving you hungry again. Criticism wounds deeply because it strikes at insecurity. Self-focus breaks this cycle by anchoring worth in awareness rather than opinion. You learn to trust the quiet voice within that arises in silence, the one not shaped by applause or rejection. This inner grounding makes you free. Approval becomes pleasant but unnecessary, criticism uncomfortable but not devastating. This path is practical, not abstract. In daily life, you can practice by noticing when comparison arises. Instead of following the thought, you pause. You turn inward. You ask, what part of me feels lacking? What story am I telling myself? In this way, envy becomes a teacher, pointing to where self-reflection is needed. Each time you redirect attention inward, you weaken the habit of comparison. Over time, the mind learns to rest in self-awareness rather than chasing external measures. Self-focus also strengthens compassion. When you are no longer consumed by comparison, you see others more clearly. Their success does not threaten you, their struggles do not elevate you. You recognize shared humanity. Joy for others' good fortune arises naturally when you are no longer measuring yourself against them. This joy, called mudita in Buddhism, is one of the highest forms of compassion. It frees you from the poison of envy and allows relationships to flourish without hidden rivalry. Another benefit of self-focus is clarity of purpose. Social comparison often scatters energy. You chase goals not because they align with your values, but because you want to keep up. Reflection helps you see what is truly meaningful. You ask, what nourishes my growth? What brings peace? What reduces harm? These questions align you with your authentic path. Even if your achievements seem small by external standards, they bring profound fulfillment because they are true to your being. This practice also heals insecurity. When you constantly compare, you reinforce the belief that you are not enough. Reflection shows that this belief is rooted in illusion. The mind creates a self-image and then measures it against others, forgetting that the self itself is impermanent and constructed. By observing thoughts and emotions in silence, you see through this illusion. You realize that worth is not a comparison, but an inherent quality of being alive. This recognition dissolves insecurity at its root. The teachings of impermanence further dismantle comparison. When you reflect deeply, you see that every success, every failure, every possession, every appearance is temporary. To compete endlessly for what cannot last is madness. Self-focus reveals the futility of clinging to status or validation. Instead, you invest energy in cultivating qualities that endure: wisdom, compassion, awareness. These are not measured against others, they are cultivated within. Self-focus also teaches responsibility. Comparison often leads to blame. You resent others for having what you lack, or resent yourself for not keeping up. Reflection cuts through this by showing that your path is yours alone. No one else can walk it. Blame fades when you take full responsibility for your growth. This responsibility is not heavy but empowering. It frees you from waiting for others to validate or rescue you. Your freedom rests in your own awareness and choices. This inner work changes outer life. Relationships become healthier because they are no longer driven by hidden envy or competition. Work becomes more fulfilling because it aligns with values rather than with external approval. Even solitude becomes rich because you no longer measure its worth against society's standards. You live from within, steady regardless of external fluctuations. The power of this antidote is quiet but profound. It does not come from dramatic renunciation, but from steady practice of turning inward. Each time envy arises, you reflect. Each time you crave validation, you pause. Each time you compare, you return to self-awareness. Slowly, the habit of comparison loses its hold. You discover peace, not by outrunning others, but by resting in your own being. The Buddha's path was never about competing with others, but about awakening within. He showed that envy and competition arise from ignorance of the self. Self-focus reveals the illusion, and in that revelation, the poisons dissolve. The antidote is not to fight comparison directly, but to see through it. Once you see clearly, the race ends on its own. In the end, the practice of self-focus is the key to freedom from one of the deepest modern illnesses. It frees you from the endless treadmill of envy and competition, from the fragile dependence on external validation. It roots you in awareness, aligns you with your true path, and opens the heart to genuine compassion. You do not need to compare when you are whole. You do not need to compete when you are at peace. You do not need validation when you trust your own awareness. And in this freedom, life becomes lighter, clearer, and infinitely more authentic. When self-focus dissolves the poison of comparison, you begin to notice another layer of bondage hidden beneath the surface, the endless cycle of wanting. Comparison fuels envy, but desire itself is the fire that keeps suffering alive. It whispers that happiness lies just beyond the next possession, the next achievement, the next pleasure. Yet the more you chase, the further peace slips away. Buddhism points again to silence as the medicine. Inward quietness dismantles craving at its root, showing that excess desire is not quenched by more attainment, but by the stillness that reveals contentment was present all along. Desire in itself is not always harmful. The desire to eat when hungry, to rest when tired, to seek warmth in the cold, these are natural and necessary. The suffering begins with excess, with the kind of wanting that no longer serves life, but enslaves it. Craving for status, for approval, for endless possessions, for stimulation without end. This is the hunger that never rests. It promises satisfaction, but delivers only more thirst. Silence unmasks this lie. When the mind grows quiet, you notice the restless pull of desire more clearly. Without noise, cravings appear like ripples on a still pond. You see the urge to reach for distraction, to grasp at more comfort, to chase fleeting pleasure. In ordinary life, these urges pass unnoticed because noise covers them. But in silence, they reveal their constant presence. At first, this can feel unsettling, as if the mind is addicted to wanting. But this awareness is the first step toward release. The Buddha described craving as the root of suffering, the chain that binds beings to the cycle of rebirth and discontent. To see craving clearly is already to loosen its grip. Silence is the condition that allows this clarity. By sitting without chasing, without consuming, without distracting, you begin to notice that desire arises, peaks, and falls on its own. You do not need to obey it. The more you observe without acting, the weaker its hold becomes. Excess desire thrives on the illusion that happiness is elsewhere. It convinces you that contentment will arrive when conditions are perfect. Silence cuts through this illusion by bringing you back to the present. In quietness, you discover that peace is not in the next purchase, the next accomplishment, the next recognition. It is here, in the stillness of awareness. The craving loses strength because its promise is exposed as false. Contentment arises not by satisfying every desire, but by recognizing you already have enough. Silence trains the mind to rest in this truth. When the world's noise fades, you notice simple joys, the breath flowing, the body alive, the space around you steady. Gratitude naturally follows. The craving for more softens because you see abundance in the present. What once felt lacking is revealed as complete. This does not mean rejecting life or refusing all pleasures. The middle path is not self-denial but balance. Excess desire creates suffering, but mindful enjoyment of life's gifts brings harmony. Silence helps you distinguish between the two. You learn to tell the difference between natural need and restless craving. You eat when hungry, not when bored. You rest when tired, not when anxious. You seek joy without clinging to it. Silence teaches moderation without force, balance without repression. Desire often hides beneath layers of identity. You crave recognition because it affirms ego. You crave possessions because they signal worth. You crave stimulation because it keeps you from facing inner emptiness. Silence strips these illusions bare. Alone with yourself, you realize how much of your wanting is not about the object, but about the image. By exposing the root, silence dismantles the structure. When you no longer need to protect the ego, many desires fade naturally. Contentment is not passive, it is active presence. In silence, you do not numb desire, you transform it. The restless energy once spent on craving is redirected into awareness, creativity, compassion. A mind no longer chasing excess has energy to live deeply. This is why monks who renounce excess are not lifeless but vibrant. Their vitality comes from freedom. Without being drained by endless wanting, they channel energy into wisdom and kindness. The modern world thrives on stimulating desire. Advertising, entertainment, social media, all are designed to feed restlessness. To live without excess craving is a radical act. Silence becomes resistance. By stepping back, by creating space free of constant input, you reclaim sovereignty over your mind. You begin to choose consciously rather than being led unconsciously by every spark of desire lit by the outside world. This discipline reshapes daily life. The choice to eat mindfully instead of indulging excess. The decision to rest in silence instead of constant entertainment. The habit of pausing before purchasing each is a practice of dismantling craving. Over time, these choices accumulate into contentment. You no longer need more because you have discovered enough. Relationships transform as well. Excess desire often poisons love, turning it into possession or dependency. Silence shows you the craving beneath attachment. You realize that true love is not about owning another or demanding constant attention. It is about presence without grasping. Contentment within yourself allows freedom for others. Love becomes lighter, more authentic, more compassionate. Work and ambition also shift. Desire for status and recognition often drives exhaustion and competition. Silence reveals the cost. It shows that striving for endless achievement leaves the heart empty. With this clarity, you learn to work from purpose rather than craving. Effort remains, but it is balanced, not enslaved. Success becomes meaningful when detached from excess desire. The death of excess desire is not a single event, but a steady dismantling. Each time you sit in silence, you weaken the chain. Each time you notice craving without acting, you break the cycle. Each time you rest in contentment, you train the mind to find peace within. Over time, the grip of craving loosens. Life feels lighter, not because you have everything, but because you no longer need everything. The ultimate lesson is that desire is not destroyed by force, but by awareness. Silence provides the awareness. It shows desire arising and passing, exposes its illusions, and reveals the contentment already present. This is the path the Buddha walked, and the path still open to anyone willing to sit in quietness. Excess desire dies not with dramatic renunciation, but with steady awareness in silence. Contentment born from this practice is unshakable. It does not depend on possessions, status, or external conditions. It is rooted in the recognition that peace is always available when craving is released. Silence is the doorway, desire the obstacle, and awareness the key. By walking this path, you free yourself from the fire of wanting and rest in the coolness of enough. And in that stillness, you discover that contentment was never far away. It was always waiting in the quiet. When silence teaches you how to dismantle craving and rest in the fullness of enough, you also begin to notice how often desire disguises itself in another form, the desire to be right. The need to win debates, to prove your perspective, to persuade others until they yield is one of the subtlest cravings of the ego. It wears the mask of logic, of justice, of truth-seeking, but beneath it is the same restless hunger to secure identity through dominance. Buddhism offers a simple yet radical teaching. Peace often comes not from winning arguments, but from stepping away from them. The wisdom of withdrawing from argument is the recognition that silence can preserve harmony where words would only deepen division. Arguments seem to promise resolution, yet they rarely deliver it. Each side defends more fiercely, voices rise, and the truth becomes less important than victory. Even when one side appears to win, both lose peace. The heart is left unsettled, the mind clouded by tension, and the relationship weakened by hidden resentment. Stepping away from argument is not about cowardice or surrender. It is about recognizing that clashing egos cannot create clarity. Only stillness can. The Buddha himself often demonstrated this wisdom. When pressed with hostile questions, he frequently chose silence. His silence was not ignorance, but a refusal to entangle himself in disputes that could not bear fruit. He understood that many arguments are traps, born not from genuine inquiry, but from the ego's need to be affirmed. By withdrawing, he showed that truth does not require defense. Truth stands whether or not it is acknowledged. Withdrawing from argument does not mean abandoning communication. It means knowing the difference between dialogue and conflict. Dialogue arises when both sides seek understanding. Argument arises when each side seeks to conquer. In dialogue, silence can be broken with careful words. In argument, silence is often the greater wisdom. By refusing to fuel conflict, you preserve energy and allow time for clarity to emerge naturally. The practice begins with self-awareness. Notice the surge of energy when someone challenges you. The ego burns to respond, to correct, to assert. In that moment, you pause. You ask, will these words bring peace or will they inflame? Is my goal to understand or simply to win? Often you will see that the impulse to speak is rooted in pride, not in wisdom. Withdrawing becomes the truer strength. This withdrawal is not suppression. Suppression locks anger inside. True withdrawal is release. You allow the urge to argue to rise and pass without action. In doing so, you dissolve its power. The energy that would have been spent on endless words is conserved, redirected toward clarity and compassion. This conservation builds inner strength. It is the strength of one who no longer needs the validation of victory. In relationships, this practice transforms dynamics. Many conflicts in families and partnerships are not about the actual issues, but about the refusal to let go of being right. When one person chooses silence, the cycle ends. Arguments lose momentum when they are not fed. Over time, the absence of constant disputes creates space for genuine understanding. Peace grows not because all disagreements vanish, but because the energy of conflict no longer dominates. In communities, the same principle applies. Arguments often fracture groups, dividing people into camps that defend positions rather than working toward solutions. The one who steps back, who refuses to be dragged into heated battles, becomes a stabilizing force. Their silence communicates presence without hostility. It shows that peace is more valuable than triumph. This steadiness often inspires others to soften their stance, opening the door to cooperation. Withdrawing from argument also protects clarity of mind. Heated words cloud judgment. They stir emotions until you can no longer see the truth. Silence clears the fog. When you resist the pull of argument, you remain able to discern what is real. You can still act, still speak when necessary, but from a place of calm rather than agitation. This clarity ensures that your decisions are guided by wisdom rather than by ego. The wisdom of this practice becomes even more clear when seen through the lens of impermanence. Every opinion, every perspective is conditioned by countless factors: upbringing, culture, experience, mood. To cling rigidly to being right is to cling to what is constantly shifting. By withdrawing from argument, you recognize that truth is larger than any one perspective. You free yourself from the illusion that your view must dominate in order to have value. This does not mean that injustice should be ignored or truth abandoned. It means choosing the right way to respond. Some situations require words, but even then, they must be spoken from calm rather than from the fire of argument. The difference is profound. Words spoken without the need to conquer carry weight. They persuade not through force, but through clarity. Often, silence first makes such words possible. The practice also dismantles pride. The ego thrives on the belief that it is superior. Argument is its favorite stage. Each victory inflates it, but each defeat wounds it, creating a cycle of highs and lows. Withdrawing removes the stage entirely. Pride loses its arena. In its place arises humility, the recognition that truth does not belong to any single person. This humility is not weakness, but freedom from the exhausting need to prove. In daily life, the opportunities to practice are endless. A colleague challenges your idea, a family member provokes you, a stranger online insults you. In each case, you face a choice. Will you enter the cycle of argument, or will you step back? Each time you choose withdrawal, you reinforce peace within yourself. Over time, the habit becomes natural. You no longer feel compelled to fight every battle. Your presence itself becomes calm, and others sense it. This calmness carries unseen power. The one who does not argue cannot be manipulated easily. Insults lose their force because they find no target. Provocations fail because they are not met with fuel. This presence disarms aggression more effectively than words. It communicates strength without struggle, authority without noise. People begin to recognize that your silence is not weakness but mastery. The long-term fruit of this practice is liberation from constant conflict. Life is no longer a battlefield of opinions, but a path of peace. You conserve energy for what truly matters: growth, compassion, service, clarity. You realize that winning arguments may impress the ego, but refusing to enter them transforms the soul. This transformation is not dramatic but steady, reshaping how you meet every interaction. Buddhism calls this restraint right speech. Right speech is not only about what is said, but about what is left unsaid. The choice not to argue when no peace can arise is itself right action. It prevents harm, reduces suffering, and cultivates inner freedom. Each time you withdraw, you embody this wisdom. You show that peace is stronger than victory, silence more powerful than persuasion. In the end, the wisdom of withdrawing from argument is about choosing freedom over bondage. The ego wants to fight, awareness chooses peace. Arguments may win you points in the eyes of others, but silence wins you clarity, dignity, and strength. By stepping away, you do not lose. You gain a life unburdened by endless conflict. And in that space of peace, wisdom grows, compassion flourishes, and true strength is revealed. When the wisdom of withdrawing from argument becomes clear, you begin to notice another subtle trap hidden in everyday life. Not every disturbance comes from heated debates or conflicts. Much of it comes from words spoken casually, without thought, words that seem harmless in the moment, but carry consequences that ripple outward. Gossip shared in passing, exaggerations slipped into conversation, careless speech born from restlessness, these all plant seeds that shape the future in ways we rarely see. Buddhism calls this the hidden karma of idle talk, and it is a truth as sharp as it is humbling. Silence becomes not just a refuge from conflict, but a shield against the unseen chains created by words spoken without care. Idle talk is deceptive because it often feels light. A joke at someone's expense, a rumor repeated just to fill silence, a half-truth told to appear more interesting. These are not shouted arguments, yet they carry weight. Each word is energy. Once released, it cannot be taken back. Gossip spreads, shaping reputations and sowing mistrust. Exaggeration distorts reality, leading others astray. Careless words plant seeds of misunderstanding that may grow into resentment, even conflict. The karma is hidden because you rarely see its full effect, but it exists all the same. Silence prevents these ripples before they begin. By pausing, by refusing to speak without purpose, you stop the chain reaction of consequences that idle talk creates. This is not about becoming cold or mute. It is about recognizing the power of speech and respecting it. When words are used sparingly and with awareness, they become tools of healing instead of harm. Gossip is perhaps the most common form of idle talk. It thrives on the desire to feel significant, to bond over someone else's story, to fill emptiness with excitement. Yet gossip poisons the one who speaks as much as the one who is spoken about. Each time you participate, you reinforce patterns of judgment and mistrust. You create a habit of seeing others through flaws instead of compassion. The Buddha warned that gossip scatters the mind and weakens virtue. Silence, in contrast, builds dignity. By refusing to pass on what is not yours to share, you protect both yourself and others. Exaggeration is another hidden chain. It may seem harmless to stretch a story, to add color for attention, but each exaggeration is a departure from truth. Over time, this weakens trust. Others sense the distortion, even if they cannot name it. More importantly, it clouds your own relationship with reality. When you train yourself to bend truth for effect, you lose clarity in perception. Silence cuts this cycle. By choosing not to speak when honesty is not enough, you strengthen the habit of truthfulness. Your words, when spoken, become reliable because they are grounded in sincerity. Careless speech often arises from restlessness. When silence feels uncomfortable, people fill the space with whatever comes to mind. Jokes, criticism, trivial chatter, all to avoid stillness. But these words, though casual, carry weight. They may hurt, distract, or mislead. Each one plants a karmic seed that continues beyond the moment. To practice silence here is to cultivate patience with stillness. You learn that not every space must be filled. Silence itself can be presence, and presence needs no decoration. The karma of idle talk is not always immediate. Sometimes words return years later, reshaping relationships or reputations long after they were spoken. A rumor spread carelessly may resurface, damaging trust. A careless joke may be remembered as insult. This delayed effect makes idle talk dangerous. It hides its impact until it is too late. Silence avoids this entirely. By speaking less, you reduce the chances of harm. This does not mean never speaking. It means practicing discernment. Before words leave your mouth, you ask, are they true? Are they kind? Are they necessary? Are they timely? If not, silence is the wiser choice. This discipline transforms communication. Conversations become lighter, cleaner, more meaningful. People trust your words because they know they are not scattered carelessly. The effect of this practice on relationships is profound. When you abstain from gossip, you create safety. Friends know you will not betray them with idle words. When you avoid exaggeration, your integrity becomes visible. When you refrain from careless chatter, your presence feels calm and steady. Over time, these small acts of restraint build a reputation of trustworthiness that no declaration could create. On a deeper level, silence protects your own mind. Idle talk stirs restlessness, scattering attention outward. Each careless word strengthens the habit of distraction. Silence gathers energy inward, strengthening clarity and awareness. You feel less drained because you no longer spend energy on maintaining illusions or fueling unnecessary drama. Your mind becomes sharper, more grounded in reality. Idle talk also feeds ego. It often arises from the desire to be noticed, to appear interesting, to hold attention. By practicing silence, you weaken this egoic craving. You discover that presence does not need performance. You are valuable without filling the air with noise. This realization brings humility, a strength far greater than the fleeting thrill of being the center of attention. Even in work and community, silence has hidden power. Teams often waste energy in endless chatter, meetings filled with words that add nothing. When silence is practiced, communication becomes focused. Words are chosen carefully, action flows more smoothly, and respect deepens. Communities that respect silence create harmony because they reduce the friction caused by idle talk. Buddhism places great emphasis on right speech, one of the steps on the Noble Eightfold Path. Right speech is not only about avoiding lies, but also about refraining from idle chatter. Each word is seen as an action with karmic consequences. By practicing silence, you align with this path. You reduce harm, you cultivate clarity, and you live with greater responsibility. In daily practice, this means noticing the urge to speak without purpose. Instead of following it, you pause. You let silence hold the space. Over time, the urge weakens. You discover that silence can be more powerful than words in creating connection. A quiet presence often communicates more respect and sincerity than a flood of chatter. The hidden karma of idle talk is real, but so is the hidden power of silence. Each time you choose restraint, you create ripples of peace instead of harm. You protect trust, preserve clarity, and conserve energy. You cultivate a reputation of sincerity that others feel even without words. And most importantly, you free yourself from unconscious patterns that would otherwise bind you. In the end, silence is not emptiness, but responsibility. It is the recognition that words are powerful, that even casual speech shapes the world. By practicing restraint, you ensure that when you do speak, your words heal rather than harm. You discover that the greatest strength lies not in constant talking, but in the discipline to remain quiet when quiet is best. And in this discipline, peace takes root where conflict and confusion once thrived. When the hidden karma of idle talk is understood, a deeper dimension of silence becomes visible. It is not only about avoiding gossip or careless speech, it is about the ethical weight carried by every sound that leaves your lips. To choose silence is often to choose harmlessness. In Buddhism, this principle is known as ahimsa, non-violence, the commitment to cause no harm in thought, word, or deed. Silence practiced with awareness becomes one of the purest forms of non-violence. By refusing to react with harshness, by withholding speech that could injure, you protect not only others but also yourself from the ripples of harm. Violence is usually imagined as physical aggression, but words can wound with equal force. A single insult can scar for years, a careless statement can break trust, and a harsh tone can harden hearts. These are forms of violence as real as blows, though less visible. Choosing silence in moments of anger or conflict prevents these wounds. It interrupts the impulse to strike with words, giving space for the heat to cool. This is ahimsa, lived not through restraint of the body, but through discipline of the voice. Silence also protects the self. Each time you react violently, whether through words or actions, you plant seeds of agitation within. The anger does not vanish with expression. It lingers, leaving traces that disturb peace of mind. By choosing quiet, you protect your inner world from being poisoned by reaction. You allow the surge of emotion to pass without leaving scars on yourself or others. This is not suppression, but liberation, the recognition that you do not need to become the slave of your impulses. This practice begins with awareness of the chain between thought, word, and action. A thought of anger arises, the urge to speak follows, and soon harsh words fly. Violence is born in seconds. But if you hold silence in the gap, the chain is broken. The thought loses momentum, the word never leaves, the action never forms. By guarding the gateway of the mouth, you dismantle violence at its root. Silence as non-violence also extends to subtle forms of harm. Sarcasm, mockery, unnecessary criticism, these may appear lighter than outright insults, yet they cut just as deeply. They erode trust, weaken connection, and fuel resentment. Choosing silence instead of indulging in these habits is a form of compassion. It communicates respect without needing to prove superiority. It allows relationships to grow in safety rather than suspicion. In families, this discipline has transformative power. Arguments often escalate not because of the issue itself, but because of the words exchanged in heat. Parents lash out at children. Partners strike each other with phrases they later regret. Choosing silence in these moments is an act of love. It prevents wounds that may linger for years. It teaches that restraint is not weakness, but strength. That love can be shown by refusing to harm even when provoked. In communities, silence as non-violence becomes a stabilizing force. Groups often fracture when members respond harshly to one another. By refusing to add fuel, you become a source of calm. Others sense that in your presence they are safe from attack. This safety creates trust, and trust allows cooperation. Non-violence lived through silence builds harmony not by force but by absence of harm. The practice also extends inward. Violence is not only directed outward, it often turns inward as self-criticism. Harsh inner dialogue, constant judgment, and relentless blame are forms of inner violence. Silence can dissolve them. By pausing instead of feeding self-criticism, you soften the habit. You begin to treat yourself with the same compassion you would offer others. Inner silence is thus non-violence toward the self, healing wounds created by years of harsh inner speech. Ahimsa through silence does not mean passivity. It does not mean allowing injustice to continue or refusing to speak truth. It means choosing words carefully, ensuring that when you do speak, your intention is to reduce harm rather than to increase it. Silence creates the space for this clarity. It ensures that speech, when it arises, comes from wisdom rather than reactivity. In practice, this requires training. When provoked, the impulse to react feels immediate and overwhelming. But if you breathe, if you pause, if you let silence hold you, the energy shifts, the urge loses force. From that silence, a wiser response may emerge, or perhaps no words at all. Both are acts of non-violence, because they prevent the cycle of harm. The karmic effects of silence as non-violence are profound. Each time you refrain from reacting with harm, you prevent the creation of karmic chains that would bind you further. Instead, you plant seeds of peace. These seeds shape your future interactions, your relationships, even your inner state. Over time, your presence itself becomes a field of safety. Others feel it without explanation. They know that in your company, they are free from the threat of harm. This discipline reshapes how you see strength. The world often confuses strength with domination, with the ability to crush or silence others. But true strength lies in restraint, in the ability to remain still when provoked. Silence reveals this strength. It shows that you are not controlled by others' aggression, that your peace cannot be stolen by their noise. This strength inspires, for it demonstrates mastery not of others, but of yourself. Buddhist practice often points to the ideal of harmlessness as the highest ethic. Monks vow not to harm any living being, not only in body, but in speech and thought. For lay people, silence becomes a practical way to embody this vow. By speaking less and listening more, by refusing to react violently, by holding stillness where harm might arise, you live ahimsa in every moment. In daily life, this can be practiced in small ways. When insulted, resist the urge to answer immediately. When tempted to criticize unnecessarily, hold your tongue. When self-judgment rises, pause in silence rather than feeding it. Each act is small, but together they build a life aligned with non-violence. Ultimately, silence as non-violence transforms both inner and outer worlds. It reduces harm in relationships, creates trust in communities, heals wounds within yourself, and plants seeds of peace in every moment. It is not emptiness, but fullness, the fullness of compassion, restraint, and wisdom. By choosing quiet over reaction, you live the deepest truth of ahimsa, that peace is not achieved by force, but by the absence of harm. The more you practice, the more natural it becomes. You find yourself less entangled in conflict, less drained by anger, less bound by harsh patterns. Life grows lighter, calmer, more harmonious. And in this silence, you discover that non-violence is not only a moral principle, but a way of being, a way that leads steadily toward freedom. When silence is practiced as non-violence, you begin to realize that peace is not simply the absence of harm, but the presence of wisdom. Choosing quiet over reaction protects others and yourself, creating space where anger cannot grow. Yet within this space, another truth emerges. Much of the struggle in life is born not from aggression, but from the illusion of control. The mind believes it must manage, push, and interfere with every detail, as if peace can only be secured by grasping tightly. But when you focus inward, when you reflect deeply, you see that much of life unfolds on its own. Control is a story, not a reality, and freedom comes from loosening its grip. The illusion of control is seductive. It promises safety. If you plan enough, work enough, anticipate enough, then nothing will go wrong. Yet reality continually breaks these promises. Plans change, bodies age, relationships shift, outcomes refuse to obey. The more you try to dominate life, the more exhausted you become, because the truth is simple. Most of it is beyond your command. Self-reflection reveals this directly. You see how many times peace has come not from forcing but from allowing. How often clarity has arisen not from struggle but from stillness. Inward focus is not avoidance of responsibility. It does not mean abandoning effort or refusing to act. It means examining the mind that grasps for control, the inner restlessness that cannot tolerate uncertainty. In silence, you notice how much of your energy is spent on outcomes you cannot guarantee. You replay conversations, you worry about the future, you cling to the past. Reflection shows you that this is not control but suffering. The effort to control what cannot be controlled becomes a prison. When you focus inward, you see that life has its own intelligence. The body breathes without your command, the heart beats without your order, wounds heal without your supervision. Seasons shift, rivers flow, planets move, all without your interference. This same intelligence is present in your own life. Circumstances often resolve themselves when given space. Opportunities appear without being forced. Clarity arises when you stop trying to dictate every detail. Reflection reveals that the world is not chaos waiting for you to manage it, but a living process unfolding on its own. This recognition does not lead to passivity, it leads to wise effort. You still act, but you act where action is fruitful. You plant seeds, but you do not pull at the sprouts to make them grow. You prepare, but you release attachment to outcomes. Inward focus shows you where your responsibility ends and where trust must begin. This balance is the middle path between control and neglect. The illusion of control is often tied to fear. You try to dominate the future because uncertainty feels unbearable. But reflection teaches that uncertainty is the nature of life itself. No amount of planning erases it. By facing this directly, you weaken fear's hold. You discover that peace does not come from eliminating uncertainty, but from accepting it. When you release the grip of control, you step into alignment with reality rather than struggling against it. Relationships reveal this lesson vividly. Much conflict arises from trying to control others, expecting them to act as you wish, to meet your needs, to fit your image. Yet the more you push, the more resistance you create. Self-reflection shows that this urge to control is rooted in insecurity. By focusing inward, you shift attention from changing others to understanding yourself. You notice your triggers, your attachments, your unmet needs. From this awareness, you begin to release control. Relationships become lighter because you no longer chain them with expectation. Work and ambition also carry the weight of control. You believe that constant interference will guarantee success. Yet reflection shows that forced striving often blocks creativity and blinds you to opportunities. Some of the greatest breakthroughs come when control is loosened, when you step back and allow intuition to guide. Inward focus reveals that clarity arises not from micromanaging every detail, but from aligning with purpose and allowing flow. The body itself teaches surrender. Despite your best efforts, it will age, it will tire, it will eventually return to the earth. No control can stop this. Reflection on impermanence turns this truth from fear into wisdom. By seeing that you cannot hold on, you learn to live fully now. Each breath becomes a gift, each moment enough. This release from control is not defeat, but liberation. Silence is the ground where this insight matures. When you sit quietly, without forcing thoughts away, you see that they rise and fall naturally. The mind, left alone, often settles itself. You realize you do not need to command every moment of awareness. This same truth applies to life. By stepping back, you see that much unfolds in its own rhythm. The more you focus inward, the more you trust this rhythm. The karmic weight of control is heavy. Each attempt to dominate creates tension. Each grasping adds to restlessness. By releasing control, you prevent these seeds from being planted. You conserve energy, reduce suffering, and create space for wisdom to arise. Life becomes less about constant battle and more about alignment with natural flow. Practical application begins with awareness. Notice when you are trying to control what cannot be controlled, the opinions of others, the future of events, the outcome of every effort. Pause, reflect, ask if this energy brings peace or tension. If tension, release it. Focus on what you can shape: your thoughts, your actions, your presence. The rest belongs to the unfolding of life. This discipline reshapes identity. The ego thrives on control, believing it is the master of everything. But when you release the illusion, the ego softens. You no longer see yourself as separate from life, but as part of it. This humility brings peace. You stop trying to dominate existence and instead participate in it. Life becomes partnership, not conquest. Over time, the freedom of letting go deepens. You find yourself less anxious about outcomes, less trapped in regret, less consumed by worry. You still act with care, but you no longer cling to results. You live fully in the present, trusting that life unfolds as it must. This trust does not make you passive, it makes you resilient. You flow with change instead of breaking against it. The illusion of control was never truth, it was always fear disguised as strength. By focusing inward, you pierce this illusion. You see that peace comes not from mastering every detail, but from mastering your response to life's uncertainty. You discover that much of what you sought to command is already cared for by the intelligence of existence itself. Your role is not to dominate but to align, not to control but to trust. In the end, self-reflection shows that surrender is not weakness but wisdom. To break the illusion of control is to free yourself from endless struggle. It is to live with open hands, steady in effort yet free from grasping. It is to act with care but rest in trust. And in this balance, you discover a life that feels lighter, calmer, and more in harmony with the truth that everything unfolds naturally when you stop forcing it to obey. When self-reflection exposes the illusion of control, life begins to look different. You see that so much unfolds without your interference, that peace is found not in constant grasping, but in trusting the natural rhythm of existence. From this recognition comes another doorway: the role of solitude. What once felt like emptiness or loneliness reveals itself as a profound teacher. Time alone becomes a mirror, a guide, even a voice of the Buddha within, showing you truths that cannot be heard in noise. Solitude is no longer absence but presence, no longer isolation but instruction. At first, solitude can feel threatening. The absence of others strips away distractions, leaving you face to face with yourself. Without external voices to affirm or distract, suppressed emotions surface. Boredom arises, restlessness appears, and the mind runs in circles. This discomfort is why so many avoid being alone. Yet if you stay, if you resist the urge to flee into activity or company, solitude begins to shift. The stillness turns from hostile to nurturing. It reveals insights that no teacher, no book, no lecture could ever give. Solitude becomes a teacher because it removes illusions. In company, it is easy to wear masks, to perform roles, to seek approval. Alone, those masks fall. You see clearly what you fear, what you crave, what you cling to. Solitude exposes the raw truth of your being. This honesty can be painful, but it is also liberating. Only when you see yourself without disguise can you begin to transform. Silence in solitude is the first lesson. It teaches authenticity. Inwardly, solitude awakens forgotten capacities. Creativity often flourishes in quiet, when the mind is not pulled outward but allowed to wander freely. Many great works of art, philosophy, and spiritual insight were born in solitude. The Buddha himself withdrew to the forest. Saints sought deserts. Sages sat in mountains. They were not escaping life, but listening to it more deeply. Solitude provided the space where truth could surface unhindered. Yet solitude is not about physical withdrawal alone. It is an inward turning, a willingness to be with oneself fully. You can be in solitude even in a crowded city if you rest in inner silence. Likewise, you can feel deeply lonely even when surrounded by people if you avoid yourself. The true teacher is not the absence of others, but the presence of awareness. When you embrace this presence, solitude becomes a sanctuary, a place where you meet not emptiness, but depth. One of the great lessons of solitude is impermanence. Alone, you notice the shifting of thoughts, the rise and fall of emotions, the passing of time more directly. With no one to distract you, the truth of change becomes vivid. You begin to see that nothing within you is fixed, not your fears, not your desires, not your identity. This insight brings freedom. If nothing is fixed, nothing must be clung to. Solitude becomes a teacher of letting go. Solitude also reveals interdependence in an unexpected way. By spending time alone, you realize how much of your usual identity depends on others, on their opinions, their reactions, their roles. When those are absent, you see more clearly that your sense of self is constructed, not inherent. Far from making you isolated, this realization deepens compassion. You recognize that others, too, build their identities on fragile constructs. Understanding your own illusions helps you meet others with patience and kindness. Another lesson of solitude is contentment. When alone, you learn to find joy in simplicity, the breath, the movement of light, the rhythm of your body. With no one to impress, no roles to play, you discover how little you truly need. This simplicity brings peace. You stop chasing constant stimulation and begin to rest in enough. Contentment is not taught by noise or abundance. It is learned in the quiet presence of solitude. Fear of solitude often arises from the belief that being alone means being unloved or incomplete. Reflection dissolves this fear. In solitude, you begin to sense a deeper presence, a stillness that feels like companionship from within. The Buddha called this awareness the refuge. When you rest in it, loneliness dissolves. You realize that you are never truly alone because awareness itself is always with you. This awareness becomes the greatest teacher, guiding you through silence. Practical solitude is not about abandoning the world, but about creating spaces of stillness within it. This can be a daily period of quiet, a retreat into nature, or even moments of pause during activity. Each time you step into solitude, you give yourself the gift of reflection. Over time, these moments accumulate into wisdom. You begin to carry solitude with you, even in company, as a steady presence that keeps you grounded. The fruits of solitude are many. Clarity arises because distractions fall away. Strength grows because you no longer depend on others for constant affirmation. Compassion deepens because you understand yourself and, through that, understand others. Creativity awakens because silence gives space for new ideas to form. Above all, peace blossoms because solitude teaches you to rest in your own being without fear. Buddhism reminds us that solitude is not escape but practice. The Buddha encouraged periods of seclusion precisely because they reveal what cannot be seen in noise. Yet he also warned against clinging to solitude as an identity. The point is not to withdraw forever, but to use solitude as a teacher, then return to the world with greater wisdom. Solitude prepares you to live more fully, not to avoid living. Over time, solitude teaches trust. You learn to trust silence, to trust awareness, to trust the unfolding of life. The fear of emptiness fades, replaced by the recognition that what you called emptiness is fullness, fullness of presence, of clarity, of truth. Solitude shows you the Buddha within, the guide that was always waiting in the quiet. You realize that the answers you sought from others were already here, whispering in the silence of your own heart. When solitude becomes a teacher, it changes how you live. You no longer fear being alone because you know its value. You no longer avoid silence because you see its wisdom. You no longer cling to constant company because you carry a steady presence within. Solitude is no longer loneliness but liberation, no longer absence but guidance. And in this way, time alone becomes one of the most profound teachers you will ever meet, one that leads you directly to the truth of who you are. When solitude becomes a teacher, you begin to sense that silence does more than reveal inner truths, it also heals. The calm you discover alone is not only a lesson for the mind, but a medicine for the entire being. Stillness works not just on thoughts and emotions, but on the body itself, easing tension and restoring balance. Buddhism has long taught that silence nourishes the soul, yet modern understanding shows it also resets the nervous system. In quiet, both mind and body return to harmony, proving that stillness is not weakness but renewal. The nervous system is the bridge between your inner world and the outer environment. Every sound, every demand, every stressor is registered here. In constant noise, the system remains in a state of vigilance. Muscles tighten, breath shortens, the heart beats faster. The body lives as if danger is always near. Over time, this state of alertness drains energy, weakens immunity, and clouds clarity. Silence interrupts this cycle. It signals safety. In quiet, the nervous system shifts from defense to restoration, from tension to calm. This reset is not passive. It is active healing. When the mind grows still, breath deepens naturally. The heart rate slows, blood pressure eases, and hormones of stress begin to decline. Muscles unclench, allowing energy to flow more freely. The body, once locked in survival, turns toward repair. This is why silence feels nourishing. It is not merely psychological, it is physiological renewal at the most fundamental level. Buddhism has always recognized this connection. Monks retreat to forests and caves not only for spiritual clarity, but for the healing stillness of nature. The absence of constant stimulation allows body and mind to rest together. In this rest, awareness deepens, compassion strengthens, and health improves. Modern science now echoes what the tradition has long taught. Silence is medicine for the nervous system. The soul, too, is reset by stillness. In noise, the mind scatters outward, chasing distractions, replaying worries. The soul feels fractured, pulled in 1,000 directions. Silence gathers the pieces back. In stillness, you feel whole again, anchored not in chaos but in presence. The rest you experience is not sleep, but awakening, the return to your natural state of peace. Daily life often leaves little space for this reset. Phones buzz, voices demand, environments overflow with stimulation. The nervous system is rarely given a chance to exhale. This is why deliberate silence is essential. Even a few minutes of stillness can shift the system, creating a pause where restoration begins. A walk without headphones, a meal eaten in quiet, a moment of breath before bed. These small acts provide sanctuary for both body and soul. The effects accumulate. Regular silence reduces chronic stress, improves sleep, strengthens immunity, and enhances focus. The mind becomes clearer because the body is no longer trapped in tension. The soul feels lighter because attention is no longer scattered. This cycle of renewal builds resilience. You become less reactive, less exhausted, more capable of meeting life with steadiness. The Buddhist path sees silence not as absence but as nourishment. Just as food sustains the body, stillness sustains the nervous system and the soul. Too much noise is like overfeeding on distraction. It clogs, it burdens, it overwhelms. Silence is fasting for the mind, cleansing for the spirit. It gives space for what is natural to emerge: clarity, balance, peace. This reset also deepens compassion. When the nervous system is strained, patience wears thin. Frustration rises easily, empathy shrinks. In silence, tension eases, and the heart opens. You respond more gently because you are not carrying the burden of constant stress. Compassion is not forced. It flows naturally when the body and soul are rested. Stillness also strengthens awareness. In a state of balance, you notice more the rhythm of breath, the subtleties of emotion, the details of experience. The nervous system, no longer overwhelmed, sharpens perception. The soul, no longer scattered, feels connected. Silence becomes the ground where mindfulness flourishes. This practice is not about escaping life, but about sustaining it. Without regular resets, exhaustion accumulates, and even joy becomes difficult to feel. With silence, energy is renewed, and life regains depth. The smallest moments, a smile, a breeze, a breath, become rich again because you are present to receive them. The karmic effect of silence as reset is profound. By reducing stress and restoring balance, you prevent the harm that arises from exhaustion and reactivity. You plant seeds of peace in your body and mind, which ripple outward in every interaction. Your presence becomes calmer, your decisions wiser, your relationships healthier. Practicing this reset can be simple. Begin by creating pockets of silence in your day. Notice the urge to fill every gap with sound or activity, and instead allow stillness. In these moments, focus inward. Feel the breath, sense the body, rest in awareness. Each pause is a gift to the nervous system. Each moment of quiet, a nourishment for the soul. Over time, silence becomes not only a practice, but a way of being. You carry the reset within you. Even in noise, you touch the inner stillness. Even in stress, you return quickly to balance. The nervous system learns resilience. The soul learns peace. Life no longer feels like constant depletion, but like steady renewal. Silence as a reset reveals the truth that healing is not always in doing, but in allowing. The nervous system knows how to restore itself when given the chance. The soul knows how to return to peace when distractions fall away. Your task is simply to provide the space, and in that space, stillness does its quiet work, resetting both body and spirit toward harmony. When silence resets the nervous system and restores the soul, you realize that stillness is not only for recovery, but also for transformation. In quiet, the body heals and the heart softens, but something even more profound becomes possible: the cultivation of mastery over the self. Buddhism teaches that true strength does not come from constant action, but from the ability to watch without being consumed. By developing the observer's mind, you dissolve suffering before it takes form. You learn that watching with awareness is more powerful than reacting blindly, and in this watching lies the key to freedom. The habit of human life is to react. A thought arises, and you chase it. An emotion stirs, and you act on it. A provocation comes, and words spill out. This chain feels automatic, but it is not unbreakable. The observer's mind is the space between stimulus and response. It is the ability to see the thought, feel the emotion, notice the impulse, and simply watch. By watching, you cut the chain. The thought passes, the emotion changes, the impulse weakens. Suffering dissolves before it hardens into words or actions that would create lasting consequences. This skill begins with awareness of how the mind operates. In silence, you see how thoughts arise on their own, like clouds drifting across the sky. You did not choose them, they simply appeared. The same is true of emotions. They surge like waves without your command. By watching closely, you realize that you are not the thoughts or the emotions themselves, but the one who notices them. This shift is the beginning of mastery. Instead of being pulled into every storm, you remain steady as the witness. The observer's mind does not repress. It does not push thoughts away or deny feelings. It allows everything to arise, but refuses to be enslaved by it. Anger may appear, but the observer watches. Fear may come, but the observer notices. Desire may pull, but the observer remains steady. In this watching, the grip of suffering weakens. What once controlled you becomes transparent, losing its power. This practice also dismantles the illusion of permanence. When you watch thoughts and emotions, you see their impermanence directly. Anger flares and fades, joy rises and falls, sadness passes like weather. By observing this constant change, you stop clinging. You no longer panic when pain arises because you see it will pass. You no longer grasp desperately at joy because you see it too will change. Watching dissolves attachment, and with it, suffering. The observer's mind also protects relationships. Many conflicts arise not from what is said, but from reactions to fleeting emotions. A word spoken in anger can wound for years. By watching instead of acting, you prevent these wounds. You allow the surge of emotion to pass before speaking. The silence that comes from watching becomes protection, a shield against harm. Over time, this restraint builds trust and harmony. Inwardly, this discipline creates profound stability. The mind that watches does not scatter with every distraction. It becomes steady, like a mountain unmoved by passing clouds. This stability brings peace even in difficulty. Challenges remain, but suffering lessens because you no longer add reactivity to pain. You face life with clarity instead of confusion. Self-mastery through watching also reveals the roots of suffering. By observing thoughts without acting, you see patterns. You notice how desire arises from insecurity, how anger is often a mask for fear, how jealousy comes from comparison. These insights are only visible when you do not rush into reaction. Watching gives you knowledge of the mind's hidden workings, and this knowledge allows transformation. The practice extends beyond meditation. In daily life, every moment becomes an opportunity. When someone criticizes you, instead of replying instantly, you watch the reaction inside. You notice the sting, the urge to defend, the heat rising, and you remain silent. The emotion shifts, and clarity emerges. In this clarity, you may choose wise words or no words at all. By watching, you dissolve suffering before it multiplies. This skill also enhances compassion. When you see your own thoughts and emotions arise and pass, you recognize the same in others. Their anger is a wave, their fear a cloud, their desire a surge. You no longer judge them harshly because you see they too are caught in impermanence. Compassion arises naturally from this understanding. The observer's mind does not separate you from others. It connects you more deeply by revealing shared humanity. The karmic impact of this practice is profound. Most negative karma is created in moments of blind reaction, words spoken in anger, actions driven by fear, choices born of desire. By watching instead of reacting, you prevent these seeds from being planted. You conserve energy and reduce harm. Over time, the absence of reactivity reshapes your destiny, aligning your life with peace instead of conflict. Developing the observer's mind requires patience. At first, watching feels impossible. Thoughts race, emotions surge, and you are swept away. But each moment of noticing is progress. Each time you catch yourself before reacting, you strengthen the habit. Over time, watching becomes more natural. You begin to rest as the observer, even in challenging situations. The space between impulse and action widens, giving freedom where once there was only compulsion. This path leads to deeper insights into the nature of self. As you watch thoughts and emotions arise and pass, you begin to question, if I am not these thoughts, not these feelings, then who am I? The observer's mind reveals that the self is not fixed but fluid, not solid but spacious. You are the awareness itself, not the contents within it. This realization cuts through ego and opens the door to liberation. The fruits of this mastery are subtle yet transformative. You live with less regret because you no longer act from blind impulse. You carry less anger because you allow it to pass without feeding it. You feel less fear because you see it as transient. Life becomes lighter because suffering dissolves before it can harden. This is self-mastery, not domination over others, but freedom within yourself. In the end, watching rather than acting is not passivity but wisdom. It is the discipline to hold still when the mind demands reaction, the strength to let emotions pass without fueling them, the clarity to see impermanence directly. By cultivating the observer's mind, you prevent suffering before it forms, conserve energy for what matters, and live with steady peace. This is mastery not of the world, but of yourself, and in that mastery you find freedom. When mastery through watching rather than reacting becomes your way of living, you discover a freedom that is subtle yet profound. You see how much suffering dissolves when you no longer rush to defend, retaliate, or cling to every impulse. From this awareness grows another discipline, one that strikes at the heart of ego's constant restlessness, the art of not explaining yourself. To hold back from justification is to free yourself from the chains of perception, to stop living as a reflection of others' opinions, and instead embody the quiet power of authenticity. The urge to explain is deeply ingrained. From childhood, you are conditioned to defend choices, to prove worth, to make others understand. Approval feels like safety, and misunderstanding feels like danger. This conditioning creates a life spent performing, where each action is accompanied by a story crafted to satisfy others. Yet in truth, explanations often do not bring peace. They feed the cycle of dependence, tying your freedom to others' acceptance. The subtle art of not explaining yourself breaks this cycle. When you refrain from explaining, you discover the difference between action and image. Action arises from clarity within. Image is constructed for external eyes. Explaining often belongs to the image it tries to control how others see you. But when you release the need to explain, you place your energy back into the action itself. The choice stands on its own, silent yet strong. This silence communicates more authenticity than words ever could. This practice does not mean refusing to communicate when clarity is truly needed. It means recognizing when explanations are not for understanding but for ego. Most justifications arise not because others require them, but because your own insecurity craves approval. By pausing, by noticing the urge to justify, you begin to see its source. And once you see, you can choose silence instead of compulsion. The freedom this brings is immense. You are no longer pulled into endless cycles of proving yourself. You are no longer trapped by the shifting judgments of others. Misunderstandings may still occur, but you discover they do not define you. The silence of not explaining becomes a shield, protecting your authenticity from being diluted by the need to satisfy every expectation. Relationships benefit deeply from this practice. When you stop over-explaining, you create space for respect. Constant justification often communicates distrust. It suggests that others cannot accept you without being persuaded. Silence, on the other hand, communicates confidence. It says, "I trust my choices, and I trust you to meet them without endless defense." Over time, this builds deeper trust because it is grounded in authenticity rather than performance. This restraint also prevents unnecessary conflict. Explanations often open the door to argument because they invite others to challenge or critique. By choosing silence, you avoid creating battles that never needed to exist. You act, you remain steady, and the storm of reaction passes without entangling you. This is not avoidance but wisdom, the recognition that peace often lies in what is left unsaid. The practice also strengthens inner clarity. When you no longer waste energy crafting justifications, you are forced to face the real reason for your choices. You ask yourself, am I acting from alignment or from ego? If the action feels true within, it requires no defense. If it feels false, no explanation can make it authentic. This honesty deepens self-awareness. You act more carefully because you know you will not rely on excuses to cover missteps. This discipline dismantles the ego's hunger for validation. Explaining is often an attempt to shape how others see you, to maintain an image of goodness, intelligence, or strength. By choosing not to explain, you deny the ego its stage. You step off the performance, allowing yourself to simply be. This humility frees enormous energy. Instead of constantly editing your life for an audience, you live it directly. The karmic consequences of restraint are also powerful. Justifications often lead to entanglements others misunderstand. You defend, they counter, and the cycle deepens. Each word plants seeds of tension. Silence ends this before it begins. By not explaining, you prevent countless ripples of conflict and protect harmony. The energy saved becomes fuel for growth rather than for endless defense. Practical application begins with awareness of the urge. Notice in daily life how often you start to explain why you are late, why you said no, why you chose differently. Most of the time, these explanations are not truly required. Pause. Ask if your words are necessary. Often, silence is enough. You will discover that the world continues even when you do not justify. Misunderstandings fade on their own. Respect grows from restraint, and your authenticity shines more clearly. This practice does not harden you, it softens you toward truth. You no longer manipulate with explanations, no longer cling to being seen in a certain way. You allow yourself to be misunderstood, and in doing so, you discover strength. To be at peace while not being fully understood is one of the highest forms of freedom. It shows that your center is no longer dependent on external validation. The Buddha himself embodied this wisdom. When pressed with questions meant to trap him, he often remained silent. He knew that explanation would not lead to understanding, but only to further entanglement. His silence was not avoidance, it was teaching. It showed that truth needs no defense, that authenticity requires no justification. By walking this path, you align yourself with the same wisdom. Over time, the art of not explaining yourself becomes natural. The urge to justify weakens, the need for approval fades, the fear of misunderstanding dissolves. You act from clarity, speak when necessary, and allow silence to carry the rest. This presence communicates more than words, because it is rooted in authenticity rather than performance. In the end, restraint from explaining is not about silence for its own sake, but about freedom. Freedom from the need to perform, freedom from the chains of perception, freedom from the ego's endless hunger to be seen a certain way. By mastering this subtle art, you discover that authenticity is strongest when left unguarded, that truth stands firm without defense, and that silence can speak louder than any justification. This is the power of living without explanation, a life steady, free, and deeply real. Silence has revealed itself to be more than just the absence of noise. It is the ground where restlessness settles into wisdom, where ego dissolves without a fight, where hidden shadows rise only to be healed. It is discipline, compassion, clarity, and refuge. By focusing inward, you discover that peace is not something you must chase, it is something you uncover, moment by moment, in the quiet within. From non-reaction to noble silence, from releasing comparison to dissolving excess desire, each step shows the same truth. When you stop stirring the water, it clears on its own, and in that clarity, life realigns itself naturally. So now the question is yours. Where will you begin? Will you start with a single pause before speaking, with 5 minutes of solitude each day, or with the courage to stop explaining yourself? Share in the comments what silence has taught you or what you are ready to let it teach you. Your reflections may spark the journey for someone else. If you found wisdom here and want to keep walking this path together, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. More lessons, more reflections, more practices are waiting, and the bell will make sure you never miss them. Until next time, keep your silence alive and watch how everything begins to fall into place.